And we'll get started with today's affair, seeing 12:45 on my computer's clock. Welcome back to day 2 of the Saskatchewan Beef Industry Conference 2021 virtual edition. I'm Ryder Lee, the CEO of the Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association, and the guy that got voluntold that he's doing some emceeing for this show. So we had a great day yesterday. We started with hearing from Minister Merritt, and he unrolled or announced some of the Agricultural Development Fund and Canadian Agricultural Partnership funding for research into livestock and forage. And I think it was about $7.5 million there, and great to see that continued partnership between the federal and provincial governments and industry as well, and SCA and other associations that were mentioned as co-funders. They really do see your industry dollars leveraged by those government investments. And we followed that up with Michelle Payne talking about taking food bullying by the horns with lots of good tips and stories about really engaging with people about their questions about food and about food production and how to, really, I think she challenged us all to step up and be the source of good information out there in the world when it comes to what we do as an industry, what you do on your farms, and all the kind of different things that you raise, and building a connection and then having a conversation and making sure you're finding out what people are asking before you get busy telling them what you want to tell them. Then we switched over to get a little bit about research, and we had the Sask Beef and Forage Symposium presentations. Tamara Carter talked about the forage selection tool that you can find at beefresearch.ca or through the Forage Council website, or there's several ways to get there, but a great tool for picking your forages. And then we had Dr. Bart Lardner and Dr. Bill Billiget talking, and Bill was talking about cereal pea blends, and Bart was talking a little more about brome grass and the mixes like that. So we had a little break because we kind of eat into that a little bit. And then we had a panel of Holly Thompson, Garrett Pollitz, and Julie Mortensen, and our young producer panel talking about the challenges of the year past and looking ahead, and a good conversation we had there. So we're kind of following that kind of form today. Again, we're going to have a little conversation from the Ministry of Agriculture, and then we're going to have another keynote speaker, and that's Kevin Folta. And then we're going to go to a panel, an industry panel. We're going to have Michael Young and John Lawton and Tyler Bjornson. And then we're going to finish up with another keynote speaker, and that's Mike Shellenberger. So as we move into this, I think we're going to have a note from the Ministry of Agriculture, but to introduce that is Arnold Bilicki, Chair of the Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association.
Thanks, Ryder. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arnold Bilicki, and I am Chair of the Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association. On behalf of the SCA, I would like to thank you for participating in our conference. Day 1 was great and provided lots of useful information, and I think day 2 may even top it. This afternoon, we will hear presentations from Dr. Kevin Folta, a fantastic industry panelist, as well as Michael Shellenberger, another fantastic panelist. But first, we'll kick off the afternoon with a short presentation from someone very well known to our industry, Minister Lyle Stewart. Once again, I am pleased to welcome everyone who have joined us for day 2. We welcome your questions and participation, and I'm looking forward to a great day. With that, let's get started.
I want to talk a little bit about my perspective on the 3 phases of the irrigation project that we've been talking about, and this project has been talked about for a very long time. The timing Timing is really right, though. In the United States, where a lot of our produce comes from irrigated land in the U.S., both the Ogallala aquifer that feeds, I think, 10 states in the western part of the U.S. is drying up, and over the next 25 years at the present rate of use, it's predicted to be dry. And of course, I don't suppose it'll be dry in 25 years, but certainly irrigation is one of the things that will be greatly curtailed in 10 states, including major irrigators like Arizona, California, and Texas that feed off the Ogallala aquifer. And in the Midwest, the eastern aquifer feeds a large amount of irrigation in the Midwest, and it's in exactly the same shape as the Ogallala is, and expected to be dry in 25 or 30 years at the current rate of use. And all the same issues apply to that one. In other words, between those two aquifers, and the fact that Alberta has used up their water allotment that comes to us through the Saskatchewan River system, we are the best opportunity in Canada for sure, and I would say, from what I know, North America. And we will attract the attention of food processors, and I think it's a huge opportunity for the province and for the producers in the areas that are interested in irrigation. It'll give our farmers an opportunity to grow higher value crops, table crops, and that will provide huge opportunities and give our country more food security. You know, when I was first, when we first became government in 2007, that was my first assignment, was Minister of Enterprise and Innovation. And of course, that's economic development. So I'm trying to attract some industry to the province, and I, being a farmer, food processing was one of the first things that came to my mind. And so I came in contact with a large company from Ontario, a large food processor you might know as Campbell Soup, and told them about us, and they were interested, but not ready to make a move at that time. Later, in about 2016, I think, when I was Minister of Agriculture, I asked the people at Agriculture to come up with a list of food processing companies in the country that had older facilities and maybe not in the best, most business-friendly places to do the kind of work that they did. And Campbell Soup was right on the top of that list again. So we had a visit with them, and then eventually they came here. And when they got here, they knew everything about us, and they knew more about the Outlook area than probably most guys that actually farm there do. They knew the soil types and the different RMs, and they had rainfall stats for every RM in the area. And they knew about our long summer days, and they knew about our heat units, and they were well informed. And they told us, after some talks and them doing a bunch of research in the area, that with 110,000 acres of irrigation in the area, although we could produce pretty much everything they wanted, it wasn't enough to assure them supply, because they recognize that you can't ever contract at all. And so that stuck with me. That was a major disappointment that stuck with me. And I never forgot about these potential projects in the area to increase that irrigation base. And it's not just about agriculture, it's about the whole economy, and as I mentioned, food security, but it's business attraction, it's processing investment, and it's job creation, potentially in the thousands, and a broader, more secure tax base, both for the province and for the municipalities in the area and near the area. The project is in 3 phases. It's proposed in 3 phases to be built out over the next 10 years or so, and is estimated to cost up to $4 billion. Phase 1 and phase 2 are focused on finishing the West Side Canal, finishing and expanding the West Side Canal, and works that were abandoned by a previous government in the early 1970s. This year, $22.5 million have been budgeted as part of phase 1 to immediately begin preliminary engineering and initial construction of the West Side irrigation project. Preliminary soil quality analysis of the Qu'Appelle South irrigation project will also begin this year and funded out of that $22.5 million. The first portion of the West Side project will begin first and cost roughly $500 million and will in itself irrigate about 80,000 acres. But it will be built large enough to accommodate phase 2. This project is considered one of the most shovel-ready in our province, and with 90% of the original main canal already in place, although in need of rehab and enlargement. The Qu'Appelle South project would be a large multi-use water supply system with capacity for about an additional 120,000 acres of irrigation and cost close to $2 billion. It will provide the Moose Jaw-Regina industrial corridor with a secure source of water for the next century, as well as many other communities and potash mines and things of that nature, businesses and industries in the area. $4 billion is a lot of money, and we don't throw that sum around loosely. We're still hoping to get a commitment from the federal government, and we're working hard at achieving that. But this is a project that is transformational to the economy of Saskatchewan, and we are committed to seeing it built. And as I mentioned, starting with phase 1 of the West Side. The whole project provides huge building blocks for the economy of the province, and will create more jobs in almost every sector of the economy.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's Patrick Boyle with the Water Security Agency with Clinton Moldy, and I think you'll hear from Lyle Stewart with the Water Security Agency here as our dedicated to this file and irrigation in a little bit. But just to put some context on what you're going to hear here, essentially what we're doing in these presentations is letting everyone know kind of where we're at, what the project is in some more detail, and then where we're headed. And you've probably heard a lot about this project and what's going on with it, but from our perspective here, this is kind of the latest and greatest of what we have. And there's going to be this is the start of a conversation that's going to go many years here, and really just to talk about the importance of what it means to the province and how this is truly not just an agricultural project here, but really something that looks for transformational for the province. So with that, I'll toss it over to Clinton Moldy here, and he'll take you through it.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm just going to turn my camera off here and concentrate on the presentation. And I just want to say that the presentation I'm going to give you today is at a very high level. A lot of the work that's been done has been conceptual in nature, and as we go forward, we'll start to refine the design and have more answers for irrigation in the province. When we talk about the announcement that happened in July 2nd of 2020, we're basically talking about 2 projects, and we have the West Side Irrigation Project, which is phase 1 and phase 2, and we have the Qu'Appelle South Water Conveyance Project, which is phase 3. And those 3 phases, essentially 2 projects, make up the Lake Diefenbaker irrigation expansion projects. So the history of Lake Diefenbaker, certainly, it got its start back in the dirty 30s when there was seen to be a need for a secure water supply for southern Saskatchewan. And that came to fruition with the completion of Gardner Dam and the creation of Lake Diefenbaker in 1967. The reservoir itself provides fresh water to over 60% of Saskatchewan's population. And that water supply is for municipal, industrial, recreation, irrigation, and hydroelectricity, as well as providing some flood control for downstream landowners. That initial vision for Lake Diefenbaker was for 500,000 acres of irrigation. Currently, we're at about 20% of that envisioned irrigated acres, or about 110,000 acres. Lake Diefenbaker is seen as one of the largest and untapped sources of water in this country. Water Security Agency owns and operates the reservoir, and our analysis and studies show that there's more than enough water to supply these 2 irrigation projects. When we look at the past flow data, we found that without significant change in operating, there's nearly 900,000 acre feet of water per year for water available for irrigation. These projects, when they're fully developed, will use less than 700,000 acre feet per year. To give you some stats, just so that you recognize the size of Lake Diefenbaker, it has a storage capacity of 7.6 million acre feet. And 1 acre foot is basically 1 foot of water on an acre of land. When we look at the median annual inflow, and this is what we would expect 50% of the time, is 4.5 million acre feet, which is important. And that shows that 50% of the time, we will have more than enough water to replenish half the reservoir's volume. The lake itself is 225 kilometers long and has a surface area of 110,000 acres. And when we look at providing water to 500,000 acres of irrigation, this means about 5 to 7 feet of water off the top of Lake Diefenbaker. And when you look at the volume, or I should say the depth of the lake, it's about 185 feet deep at Gardner Dam and about 200 feet deep at the Riverhurst Ferry Crossing. For those of you who may not be familiar with the infrastructure at Gardner Dam, this slide just gives you a bit of an orientation. So where my cursor is, you have the east side pumping plant, and from there you have a canal that goes north. That's known as the M1 Canal, and it feeds into the Saskatoon Southeast Water Supply System, or SUS. Of course, we have Gardner Dam and the Cotto Creek Hydro Plant that SaskPower owns and operates. We have the spillway, and then as we go further west along the Cotto Bay arm of Lake Diefenbaker, you see what's noted there is the west side pumping plant and the west side main canal, which snakes towards the northwest. I want to talk a little bit about some of the existing infrastructure that's there. And this is on the east side, and is known as the East Side Main Canal Pump Station. And what you see in the top slide is Lake Diefenbaker in the background. You have Gardner Dam, where my cursor is, and then you have a pump station that was constructed in the late 60s, early 70s. And then we have the M1 Canal that comes from that and services the SUS system. When you look at this project, it's government has been rehabilitating the 22.5 kilometer length of the M1 canal over the last 10 years and spent about $100 million with that rehab. After that, we have from Broderick Reservoir all the way to near Lanigan and Delwood, those areas, we are serviced by the Saskatoon Southeast Water Supply System. And the total length is about 162 kilometers. You know, this canal, as I mentioned, was constructed in the 1960s and provides water for over 60,000 acres of irrigation, water supply to 6 reservoirs, towns and villages, 4 potash mines, and 13 wetland projects. So you can just see the importance that this infrastructure holds for Saskatchewan. And when we look at adding an additional 500,000 acres of irrigation, it's just going to mean much more economic development and food security for the province. The announcement that took place in July of last year talked about 3 phases, and I briefly talked about them at the onset, but this gives you an idea where they're located. And phase 1 is from the Gardner Dam north to Conquest, and there's some existing infrastructure there, and that's why this is phase 1, as it's probably the most shovel-ready project in the province or in Canada for irrigation. Phase 2, again, north to the Asquith area, and it goes east towards Rosetown, adding 260,000 acres for a total of 340,000 acres for the West Side project. And when we get into phase 3, we're talking this yellow area down in the bottom of the slide, and it provides water from Lake Diefenbaker, but at the Coupelle Dam, and follows Highway 42 generally down to north of Moose Jaw, and then the water goes into Buffalo Pound. It's contemplated that this project will add about 120,000 acres of irrigation, as well as providing a secure water supply for southeast Saskatchewan. Little history about the West Side Irrigation Project. As I mentioned, it was designed in the 1960s and constructed in the late 60s, early 70s. It was designed for 80,000 acres of flood irrigation, and it entailed the completion of a pump station, construction of a main canal, and then a balancing reservoir at Conquest. Construction was initiated in the 1960s, but was abandoned in 1973. When government stopped the construction, only 42 kilometers of the original 45 kilometers of canal was completed, about 95%. Also, 1/3 of the embankment was completed at Conquest, and only the concrete work at the lake was completed, and that was basically the pump station floor, the wet well, and the intake out into the lake. Since that time, in the 1980s, the McCurry Irrigation District formed, and allowing the farmers to install pumps at the existing concrete pad at the lake and a ditch block at kilometer 23. And from that, they pumped water into the existing canal and serviced 3,000 acres of irrigation. What we can expect in the future is 340,000 acres at full development, covering that large area from the dam north to Asquith over to Rosetown. But what it really means is about 400 kilometers of canals, plus many kilometers of pipelines that take the water from the canal to the edge of the quarter section. It possibly could be up to 3 balancing reservoirs to allow the system to operate efficiently. Now I just want to give you a few slides about what's in place now. And these are drone shots that were taken in May of 2020. And as you can see the concrete structure at the water's edge. And from there, water is pumped up the hill into the start of the West Side Main Canal. When we look at completing phase 1, we are going to maximize the concrete structure by building the larger building there and pumping water to support 80,000 acres from there. When we look at going into phase 2, we'll have to add additional pump capacity by building a new pump station beside the old one to the west. And that will allow for 340,000 acres of irrigation. This next slide is just from the top of the hill looking back towards Lake Diefenbaker, and it gives you a further sense of the intake that was developed, the pump station and the canal. When we look at this canal, its capacity is about 21 cubic meters a second, and to service the full 340,000 acres, we'll have to increase this capacity 4 to 5 times to get the flow that we need for irrigation. This shot again is the existing canal, and it shows the overgrowth of the canal. It also shows areas that are seeping, and you can see one here where my cursor is here and where the farmers worked around. This canal, most of it is unlined and it suffers from some seepage in different areas. This shot just shows a typical turnout, and you can see an intake where my cursor is, the pump, and then the pivot point in the background that's serviced from this takeout. Again, you can see this seepage area close up, and this is one of the issues and concerns that we'll have to address with the design and construction of the new canal. As I mentioned earlier, at about kilometer 23, we have a ditch block. And what that does is just creates a small reservoir within the canal itself and allows the area farmers to irrigate 3,000 acres by pumping directly out of the canal. The next photo just shows for the next 19 kilometers a section of dry canal that's never seen water since it was constructed in the early 70s. The canal is terminated at kilometer 42, which is directly adjacent to the Conquest, town of Conquest, and it's right at the rail line. The current plan is to extend the canal an additional 3 kilometers and complete the construction of the Conquest Reservoir, and that would be for phase 1. I want to switch gears here a little now and talk about the Qu'Appelle South Water Conveyance Project. And as I mentioned earlier, this is phase 3. It will service approximately 120,000 acres of irrigation, and that it runs from the Qu'Appelle Dam at Lake Diefenbaker southeast along Highway 42 and empties back into Buffalo Pound. And just the excerpts of this slide show you a pump station and also the outfall into Buffalo Pound. What to expect in the future is 120,000 acres, which is serviced by 100 kilometers of canal and 1 balancing reservoir north of Brown Lake. So what's next? First of all, we need to complete the engineering pre-design for phases 1 and 2 of the West Side Irrigation Project. And when we talk about that, we have to do both phases because you can't build phase 1 without knowing the full expanse of the project, which includes phase 2. With that, we need to initiate the environmental inventory and assessment and also complete the engagement processes for this project. As part of that pre-design, we need to get out on the ground and start collecting information to inform the design. And part of that is acquiring LiDAR so that we know the geographical information for the complete area. We also need to go out and conduct soils testing for many quarters of potentially irrigated land to determine if they're irritable, and then the amount of lands that are irritable will inform the overall engineering design. We also need to go out and do some geotechnical testing, which will include both looking at what's there now and going to test areas where future works are going to be constructed. We've also done a lot of project planning and also looking for securing funding with the federal government. One other thing we're going to be doing is soils testing for irrigation suitability on the Qu'Appelle South Water Conveyance Project. Some of the benefits, I'll quickly go over them. As you can tell, there's going to be lots of benefits. Community benefits, not only for the area, but for Saskatchewan, in that Saskatchewan industry will be building this for Saskatchewan people. There'll be environmental and engineering activities. There'll be significant construction going on, the operation and maintenance for the life of the projects. Also the potential for local irrigation and food processing industry growth. Economic value added, not only from the supply of all the equipment, but during construction and long-term operation. We have enhanced food security and crop diversity by allowing us to grow irrigation crops of high value. So we're looking at, table crops such as potatoes, beans, carrots, will add to food security. But we also want to look at the livestock industry, and what we'll see is increased feed opportunities for livestock. We'll also have more sources of high quality water for producers. One of the other things that we want to talk about as a benefit is it supports climate change. With climate change, we will have varying times of precipitation. And so we'll have periods of high precipitation, and then we'll have periods of drought. So we want to store that water when it's there, and we want to use it. And one of those uses will be irrigation. And that's how, through irrigation, we can drought-proof the area and also grow those high-value crops. Project governance. Our executive sponsor is Lyle Stewart. We have a steering committee which is made up of Water Security Agency, Ministry of Agriculture, SAS Builds, Finance, and Trade and Economic Development. And we have the core project team, which is WSA, Ministry of Agriculture, and SAS Builds. We also have many working groups that cover an area from technical all the way through economic development and legal and procurement. And when we look at the people made up of those working group teams, those are staff members from many different industries that we have within government. So it truly is a one-team approach to moving this project forward. So in conclusion, certainly the Lake Diefenbaker irrigation expansion projects are transformational for the province. We all recognize the significant economic benefit, adds value for the agriculture and food processing industries, improves Saskatchewan and Canada's food supply, creates many jobs not only during construction but for the long-term operation of the expansion projects, and it improves climate resiliency. With that, we have time for questions.
Well, I feel like I get to decide if we have time for questions or not. And as that was a recording, I do see a couple of questions along the side, and I'm not sure if there is people here to answer are there plans within the irrigation expansion project to update the existing infrastructure on the west side to reduce issues like seepage, or is the focus primarily on, building efficiencies into the new canal? So, what about the existing ones is one question.
For sure. And Clinton Moldy's here, and maybe I can
great.
respond to that.
Yeah.
For sure. Phase one, we're talking about the rehabilitation of what's there and expanding it to meet the needs of phase two. So yes, we are going to rehabilitate the existing works.
Okay. Two. I guess there's a question about recycling of grain bags and as a potential for doing the liner. I'm not sure if you know what goes into lining the canal, or is it pipelines that are going to replace that, as is happening in some places, or could you comment on that?
So the volume of water that needs to be pumped will certainly be benefit from a canal structure. So that's why the main delivery is going to be from the canal. But you're right, there is seepage issues, and typically what'll happen is that'll be lined with a plastic lining and protected by rock. And then where areas there's high clay content, it'll just be a clay liner.
Okay. Last one, I guess, or no, there's two. Is there enough electricity now to service the expanded project, or will new generation need to happen?
There's more than enough power generated by SaskPower to meet the needs of the project.
Great. And then I don't know if you can answer about, is it confined to Saskatchewan workers and contractors?
Certainly, that's one of the things requirements is to that we ensure that it's Saskatchewan people are put to work, and that Saskatchewan people benefit from the projects.
Great. Well, thanks for being here, Clinton, and great to hear from you and your team, and of course, Minister Stewart. And like he says, $4 billion is a lot of money. I love the delivery of messages like that. There's no question that this is significant contribution to the economy in getting it done, but then that investment of the payoff over time is certainly exciting, and something that, as you mentioned, would grow the cattle feeding industry here in Saskatchewan and add to the buyers buying Saskatchewan calves as well. So thanks very much for that. And now we're going to switch to our first keynote speaker of the day, Kevin Folta, talking about connecting agriculture and clueless consumers, a counterintuitive formula. And to do an introduction, I think there's a little video before you get started there, Kevin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Kelsey Alford. I'm president of the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association, and it is my privilege to introduce the next speaker. Dr. Kevin Folta has a background in both biology and communications. He studied biology and agriculture biotechnology for over 30 years, working exclusively in public academic institutions. His research program examines the role of light in controlling plant traits, especially those relevant to agriculture. His group is known for using innovative genomic approach to identify genes associated with fruit quality, especially flavors and aromas. He's been a professor at the University of Florida since 2002, serving as chairman from 2012 to 2018. His laboratory has hosted over 100 undergraduate researchers, dozens of international scholars, and trained many postdocs. He has mentored dozens of graduate students. His team has authored over 100 peer-reviewed research articles, scholarly reviews, and book chapters. Outreach and science communication have been cornerstone of Dr. Kevin's program. His participation in community education have brought criticism that his efforts are simply guided by industry in exchange for payoff and grants. Such allegations are baseless, yet penetrate social media. Thus, that has led to raising the bar with more media, more outreach, and better products. Throughout his career, he is trained in communication, served as an instructor in these areas, and performed countless seminars and consultations on science communications. But probably the most important, yes, it's true, he was a waiter and a busboy through college. He wrote and performed comedy, which we all expect to hear today. He played guitar in a hair metal punk band, probably Poison, but that's alleged, and was a bronze medalist in the Masters Division of the National Karate Foundation Championships in 2011 or 2012. Kevin also hates to refer to himself in the third party. Let's welcome Dr. Kevin Folta.
Wow, that's quite an introduction. That's pretty amazing. Well, thank you very much for having me aboard. Really appreciate it. Give me just a little cue that you can hear me and see that screen just right. Make sure that we're connected properly here.
We got you. Yep, you bet, Kevin.
Is the screen showing? Not yet. Okay,
Yeah, it's your face.
Just me. Okay, just me.
Yeah.
So I'll put up a PowerPoint here in a second. But thank you very much for the invitation. Wish I was there in person. Sometimes the best communication we can have on these topics happens around dinner or in a stairwell. This is always an opportunity, always a good opportunity to visit Canada. I understand a lot about where you're coming from as beef producers and some of the challenges, as well as those experienced across animal agriculture. And what I'd like to do today is kind of give you the keys to a different way of thinking about how we meet the criticisms. How can we better perform in an online environment where people are consuming information about animal agriculture and about what we do in a broader way throughout agriculture and crops as well as farm as well as ranching. And these were not intuitive, simple guidelines to come up with. It took many years of failure that I'd like to share with you here today. So let me queue up my my slide share here, my screen here. So this is the topic we'll talk about today, and I'd be happy to take your questions afterwards. Could you give me real quick, Ryder, a sense of when should I wrap up, just to get you back on time?
Okay, you're up. I can see your screen, so that's looking good. We were gonna start having some questions around 2 o'clock, and we left 15 minutes for that. So if you go into that 2 to 2:15.
Okay, no problem. I'll make sure we're rolling on time here. So as I mentioned before, as was said in the introduction, I've found a real wealth of satisfaction out of helping our agricultural industries communicate what they do more effectively. It boils down to the producers. The producers are trusted, and everybody loves the farmer and the rancher. They're trusted sources of information, yet don't step into the conversations as frequently as we should. And when we do it wrong. And I say we, I mean scientists too. We're all on the same page. So what I'd like to do today is share what I've learned over the years to be more effective. And as was mentioned, I'm a researcher. We work in small fruit genomics and how light affects plant traits. But I'm also have the privilege of being married to a farmer. She does small fruit crops, vegetable crops, specialty crops down here in Florida. 365 days a year, she's got something in the ground for sale in local markets, restaurants, that kinds of thing. But I also live on a property where we have lots of cattle, and not me, but we have cattle on the adjacent property that graze in our space, and they're wonderful. So I have a little bit of exposure to a cow-calf operation on a daily basis from our neighbors. Most of all, I appreciate very much what animal agriculture does. I'm familiar with a lot of the challenges, especially the social challenges, in connecting with a public that has been horribly misinformed and is subjected to disinformation on a daily basis that we have a hard time countering, both as scientists and as farmers and ranchers. So there's a lot that we can unpack here. title of your conference is called Navigating Uncertainty. And I understand the uncertainty and that there's quite a bit of it out there, but I think you'll take heart in the idea that what I'm going to talk about is something you can control. You know, in agriculture in any way, we're victims of things we can't control and things we can. And this is something where we can step into the communication side of what we do more effectively. And what I want to do is deputize you with the tools to engage. How do you engage the consumer and the critic? How are you being more effective in explaining what you do and what we do as scientists and farmers associated with agriculture, farmers and ranchers? How do we be more effective at that interface? And it's counterintuitive. Let's talk about some of the things you're up against. With the rollout of the Impossible Whopper and Beyond Meats and all of the other meat substitutes, there's been a flurry of anti-beef, anti-animal agriculture information. And many who are in this industry, the alternative or fake meat industries, are extremely critical of animal agriculture because their future relies on displacing your market share. And a lot of folks in animal agriculture take great defense to that, great umbrage to that, and act very defensively. And in ways that can even push back and even cause the consumer to get a little bit turned off. And I think we're going to talk about that quite a bit today. The disinformation around this is thick. And if you've seen the Burger King campaign, the recent campaign, it was horrendous and offensive. And it was distortion of the facts. But this is what we're up against. This is Burger King. These are folks who sell beef, who are now telling you how bad cows are. This is where we have to step into the conversation. And I'll show you today how to do that effectively and counterintuitively, and the ways that we can continue to manage market share, manage consumer perception, and actually increase trust in what we do. We live in an era where disinformation dominates the conversation and can affect consumer preference. We know that most consumers are getting their information through Facebook, through YouTube, through Twitter, through Instagram. This is where consumers are consuming their information, and it is filled with folks whose full-time job is to disinform them. The good news is that there are a lot more of us than there are of them. And if we can begin to step into these conversations effectively, using some of the tools I'll talk to you about today, rethinking our strategy, we certainly can overcome this tide of disinformation and do it very effectively. I think at the end of the day, it helps us win consumer trust and helps us win back consumers who may be on the fence about animal agriculture. I think it's an easy one to get. We just have to do it properly. So I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. In 2001, I lived in Madison, Wisconsin. I was a postdoc in Madison. I love Wisconsin. And I had this place at the end of the street, Willie Street Co-op. And they had horrible ideas about agriculture, about genetic engineering, about pesticides, herbicides, animals, antibiotics, you name it, down the litany of stuff to get angry about with agriculture. They were fuming. But it was a really cool little store. It was at the corner of my street. It was convenient. The people there were my neighbors. And they had a good ethic and vibe in terms of what they were trying to do. They were trying to get to a place of sustainability, of a better food quality. They were really working on that. And so we started on that common page. And I asked them, could I please give a presentation at Willie Street Co-op in the community room? And we'll talk about what genetic engineering and agriculture are really all about. And I gave a talk there, and I was freshly out of my PhD, so I knew everything. And I talked about plasmid DNA vectors in the cauliflower mosaic virus 35S promoter and how it would regulate constitutive gene expression through modification of chromatin. And I talked about the multiple cloning site of the PBI 1.3 vector and drew pictures of DNA plasmids and circles of DNA and all this technical garbage that was currently in my skull because I thought I would win favor with them if I buried them in the science and then said, trust me, I know what I'm talking about. I got the letters after my name, you know, that whole thing. Guess how many people I changed with that? Not one. It was my first spectacular failure in science communication. I learned that it wasn't about burying people in technical details. Yet here were people who showed up because they wanted to hear more about what was going on because they were concerned. We're in the same spot today. We got people who are concerned about food and farming, and yet we don't talk to them where they are. We talk over their heads. We tell them, don't worry about it. We got this. That was the stupidest thing I ever read. How could you ever think so much about that? We tend to be wrong in the way we engage them, particularly in social media. And we tend to be behaving in ways that turn off other people to our cause. And we'll talk about how we can solve that problem. Facts don't change people's mind. That's what I learned that first time. I could give people all the graphs and figures in the world and it didn't matter. Doesn't matter. Facts don't matter. If someone is making a decision that is not based on evidence, giving them more evidence is not going to change their mind. And this is the first thing we need to learn as communicators of agriculture and ranching or farming and ranching of agriculture on the broader scale is we can't change people's minds. We can only give them the information so that they can change their own mind. We have to give them a popcorn trail. We have to hold their hand through what they don't understand. And this is how we'll affect it, because people don't change their minds. Facts don't matter until we're trusted. They have to trust us. And the good news is that they inherently do with farmers, ranchers, and scientists. Trust is a combination of a couple things. It's competence, reliability, and intimacy that is divided or compared to self-motivation. So let me tell you what that means. Competence, are you able to do it? Reliability, will you do it? Intimacy, do you care? And self-motivation, what's in it for you? We know that farmers and ranchers, scientists, competence and reliability through the roof. You know what you're doing, you're good at it, you're the expert, especially in your operation. You have to do it because the animals depend on it. It is your livelihood. Competence and reliability, you nailed it. Intimacy, not so much. It's not the reason we get into agriculture or science. These tend to be more solitary fields that talking about what we do is considered bragging or considered, inappropriate. So this is a place where we fail to connect with the public. Self-motivation, what's in it for you? This is a place where we constantly hear the accusations levied. Well, you're just in this because Big Beef is telling you what to say, Folta. That's not it at all. I have concerns about the environment and about nutrition, about animal care. These are things that I think about when I think about beef and animal agriculture. So how are these parameters of competence, reliability, intimacy, and self-motivation, how are they manipulated against us, and how can we do it for us? And I will show you how to increase intimacy and self-motivation through your online strategies and behaviors. Real easy stuff. We can fix this. We have to really work on increasing our intimacy and decreasing the sense of self-motivation. Okay. Competence and reliability, you got this already. We're going to work on intimacy and self-motivation. I'll show you how that works. And I mentioned it already, people trust what we do. They trust us as scientists and agricultural professionals, ag producers. Why do we have that problem? And it's because folks who are working against us erode not just our competence and reliability, but they say they attack our motivations. They say it's all about money, that it has nothing to do with the environment, has nothing to do with animal care and welfare, that we could care less, that we're distant and aloof and don't listen to the customer. Those are the things that are levied against us, and even say that we do things that are unethical. Those are the things that are used to work against us, and that's where we can fight back. The problem is that we ignore the power of emotion. The reptile brain is a very powerful part of the brain. And when we are fighting against misinformation and disinformation in agriculture, this is what we are up against. The brain processes information in two ways, at least according to Dan Kahneman, really good book. He talks about system one, which is emotional and irrational, that this is where Information against agriculture, animal agriculture in particular, is targeted. Look at this poor animal. Look at how this worker is treating this animal. You know, these fringe rare events that they capture on film and run all over the internet. This is what they're targeting. How do we respond? Well, 65 grams of protein per day will have this kind of benefit. You know, the economic benefits, the charts and graphs and the stuff that I talked about earlier. That's where we come from. Scientists and farmers are logical and strategic. We talk about things as facts and the evidence and the things that we do on our daily operations. So this is where we miss it. We're taking evidence to a values fight. We're taking evidence to an emotional fight. And that's where we lose. So how can we fix that? Oh, this is a quote by U.S. Poet Laureate Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will never forget what you said. People will forget what you said. They'll forget what you said. They will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And you can see how this means that we need to be strategically aiming our communications efforts to approach that reptile brain, that we have to somehow touch people in their emotional centers. And when there's ways to do that that aren't silly. A good example, you know, emotion, America, time to move away from me. We've seen all of this kind of rhetoric and this kind of propaganda. Here's where we come from. Here's a table. Now you feel better, right? This is why we lose those arguments and those discussions. How do we do it? Aristotle knew how to do it. We need to come from a place of ethics. So pathos and logos. Okay, this is pathos is feelings, logos is words. So Aristotle knew that good persuasion came from ethos, pathos, and logos, a combination of all three. Pathos is that feeling, the emotion, the reptile brain. Logos is the logical brain, the executive function. This is where farmers and scientists are locked up in that logos. We don't care about how you feel. We just want the facts. We see how that doesn't sell in a battle of the heart versus the head. The heart's always going to win. This is why we have trouble connecting sometimes in animal agriculture. Ethos. Ethos is where you have the highest ability to make a difference as a beef industry and as beef producers. Ethos is ethics. Lead with ethics. Why do you do what you do? Why do you do what you do, and why are you the person to do it? Ethics are the thing that levels that playing field. This is what brings intimacy and decreases the perception of self-interest. When someone asks someone in agriculture what they do, you have to go back to the values that you share with the rest of the world. What are the things that you and the critical consumer have in common? Not the things that they're arguing with you about, the information they're making up, the false information and claims they make. What is it that you share? What are the common objectives? And if you start every animal agricultural conversation about we're in this because we know that higher protein diets early in development lead to higher cognition as adults. That's been demonstrated. It's good for healthy people. It's important to have healthy animals. It's important to provide oversight and critical care for animals, and that only the most healthy animals are the most productive animals in agriculture. So animal care is a major, major priority. We worry about the American farmer, the American rancher, because they're fewer in number and getting older. And the North American, I'm sorry, I spoke a little bit, but we share that same thing. Across Canada and the US, our farmers have an average age of 58 point something years old. And there are not a lot of young ones getting into it. It's important for us to make sure that they're profitable and that their efforts are maintained in order to maintain food security here in North America. We have to do this all with environmental sensitivity. And when we talk about that, we are in this for four major reasons. We care about animals, we care about people, we care about economic industries, we care about our environment. You will find that you are essentially on the same page as everyone who is critical or concerned about what you do. You get on the same page. You show your common concerns. That's how you start that conversation. When you do that, this gets very easy. The other problem we have is that we don't listen to people. and that the people who are our critics or people who are just concerned have very real concerns in their heart that they believe. It doesn't matter whether they're true or not. To them, they are. We can't just dismiss them. It's important to listen to them and understand where they're coming from. And the best examples of this come from hostage negotiation. This is what we learned. The book Never Split the Difference is pretty cool. What this taught us was that hostage negotiators used to strong arm hostages. They would storm the building. They would bring a bigger SWAT team. They would bash down doors and exchange fire with whoever was keeping hostages. It didn't work. People got hurt, people died. Then Chris Voss, the guy who wrote this book, said the trick was listening to the hostage taker. Sounds kind of soft. Why am I going to show up with 50 police officers, weapons drawn and trained on this building with snipers gathered around, and then start asking questions about how that hostage taker feels? Well, the reason is because it works. When you get into that hostage taker's head and you acknowledge at least some of the things that they're feeling, it helps diffuse and de-escalate the situation. A good example from the book is you would go to a hostage negotiation site and get on the phone with them. And instead of saying, we demand you release all the hostages, you'd say, what brings you here today? Why do you feel this is something that you should be doing? And they would say, you know, my family left me, my job was gone, I lost my job, I lost all my money, I got nothing left. The hostage negotiator would say, I understand that's got to be really heavy on you and got to be really bearing on you. But how do you think that this current situation is going to pan out better with you taking hostages? That kind of connection said to that hostage taker, I'm being listened to, that my concerns are being acknowledged. It's a kind of something called intellectual charity. And if you're interested in this, check that term out. It's got a lot more depth to it than I can give it here. But it gives somebody else a sense of power and control in the conversation. They're not the innocent, they're not the concerned consumer who's being pounded into the ground with data from a scientist like me or someone from the beef industry. They're being told that if I was in your shoes, I might believe the same thing. This is how we develop intimacy. It's a concern and a caring that we are listening and going to respond appropriately. It raises intimacy through the roof. Just having the same values, same common interests of animals, agriculture, food for people, food security, and environmental concerns. That gets us on the same page. Then we say, we're listening to your concerns. This is how we change the shift in that trust equation. And we win their trust by checking those boxes: competence, reliability, and intimacy, and decreasing self-motivation. We're in this for the greater good. That is how we establish trust. The other big problem that we do, that I see farmers and ranchers do all the time, and scientists, is relying on the what and how. When someone says, tell me about what you do, tell me about your job, don't tell them about what and how. Don't go on the internet and respond to a criticism with what you do and how you do it. Respond to them with why you do it. Why do you do what you do? Why do you do what you do? That's the most important question in online conversations and in diffusing situations and in trying to establish trust with your operation or industry. It's what Simon Sinek refers to as the golden circle, that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. It's a really interesting concept, but it's exactly right. And advertisers know this. Back in the old days, it used to be about, look at computers, for instance. Let's talk about Apple. In 1980s, they had the Apple's values. Here's what's important to us. Here's why we do it. Here's why we do it. What did everyone else tell you? Here's how big our hard drive is and our 4 megs of RAM. Everybody else was obsessed with the hardware. Apple was obsessed with the culture around the hardware. What are the values of our company? The values made it different. And it's the same when we're in agriculture or in science. Why do we do what we do? What drives us? Why do you put your boots on every morning and wander out in the minus 30 degrees in Saskatchewan to take care of the animals? Why do you do it? And if people know that, if we're good at articulating that, it makes our communications efforts so much more simple. The other mistake we make is losing the lurker. Now, most people are getting their information from social media, and most of our ability to push back against bad information happens in social media. The problem is that we do it in ways that are incorrect. We find someone who's spewing out bad information, and we counter it sometimes with hostility. You don't know what you're talking about. We counter it with being abrasive. That's the stupidest thing I ever heard. It's offensive to you. This is your livelihood. Sometimes what your family has done for generations. And I understand that it's hard to read the BS that's out there. But we have to counter it in graceful ways. Not because we're going to change the person who's criticizing us, but because the internet is a spectator sport. That's what Jay Bayer taught us in Hug Your Haters. The internet is a spectator sport. And for every one person who's commenting or leaving a post, there are hundreds, if not thousands, who are reading it. The comments in the sections of news articles, newspaper articles, online posts on Facebook. There's hundreds of people who are reading those, and maybe just a couple that are taking the time to comment. So when we're abrasive, when we're short, when we say you don't know what you're talking about, we may be correct, but we're going to lose. Because we lose all of those lurkers, the people who are wondering, who do I trust? Take this time to set yourself apart with your competence, your reliability. Show the intimacy. I understand why people would feel this way. But here's what I know from 5 generations of a farm that has taken care of being stewards of the land and providing the best quality products to consumers. You see, weave in those values. I can give you an example of how that doesn't work or where we fail. This is from Yelp, the restaurant review service. Taste of Venice restaurant. It says the food was awful, service horrible. If you think this is Italian food, go open a jar of Prego. You'll be happier. This might be Taste of Venice if you drank the canal water. I'll never eat there again. And we see these kinds of bitter reviews online all the time. Well, the restaurant owner comes in and says, obviously, you know nothing about Italian food. It's my family's restaurant. I hope you never return. We don't like people like you here. Don't need people like you here. The problem is that, yeah, okay, he told the guy off. But how many people looking for a restaurant to visit and are analyzing those reviews are going to feel good about Chef Mario and his restaurant? Did he earn their trust? Did he show intimacy to the point where his reliability and competence shine? Not really. What if he would have said this? I'm sorry you had a bad experience. Meals out should be special times, and I understand why you're disappointed. Okay, I'm listening. My family has run this business for 15 years, and customer service is our first priority. This is my family's business. This is why we do it. Customer service is our first priority. Our values. We value the customer. We'd love to try again. Come in and ask for Chef Mario. Dinner's on me. I'd like to sit down with you and learn what you found objectionable. We're listening. We want to get it right. Our values. And I'm sorry you were disappointed. This formula just incorporates everything I just told you about. It means showing the people who are reading, the lurkers, the people, not the person who criticized us, but those looking for someone to trust, that it's you. You're the one to trust. And this is where we fail. We can do this better. In animal agriculture, we see it all the time. You know, if you think about situations that you found online where someone criticized the beef industry or said, you know, #ban the beef, how did we respond to that? And did we respond by saying we understand people's concerns because they come from places that we see too, but we have a deep history in this industry and a deep understanding of what's best for animals. They're the cornerstone of our business. Without the animals, we have no business. You know, having those conversations and starting from those kinds of common concerns are the way that we can handle these conversations. That's how we win them. That's how we change hearts and minds. The other big failure is this is somebody else's problem. And this we see across agriculture, see it across scientists too. Yeah, there's criticism, but you know what? Someone else will sort that out. Someone from Saskatoon beef or Saskatchewan beef will sort it out. Someone from Farm and Food Care will sort it out. This is our problem or your problem as a producer. This is your problem as a specific industry. We have to be able to get more of the producers involved because they're trusted. How do we do that and where does it happen? We know that most consumers don't know much about animal agriculture other than the final products. We know they want to know where their food comes from, and they love to know the producer. That's a trend. It's documented. They don't know who to trust. How do we show them that it's you? That's the trick. And it means that you have to be participating in the conversation. And a lot of people say, I'm not going to participate in the conversation, someone else's job. I would recommend don't let someone else tell your story. That your story is powerful, your story is persuasive, and your story, along with tens of thousands of other agricultural producers, overwhelms the food babes and the PETAs out there. That we control that. This is something we can do, and we do it in two ways with content and amplification. Content, sharing something with 1,000 people. We'll talk about that in a second. Amplification, sharing someone else's good work with 1,000 people. With that, we have reached 1 million people with a message, and social media is the conduit to do it. There's all kinds of ways to do it. I won't go into detail, but just by writing, sharing, writing an op-ed, writing on a blog, writing articles on Medium, sending articles to the conversation, engaging in Reddit or discussion boards. These are all great places where you can get involved in the conversation. And it's so important that all of us do it. Once a week, 15 minutes. That's all we're asking for. And if we all did that, we would overwhelm the critics like you wouldn't believe. The problem is everybody says someone else's problem. Clean up someone else will deal with this. And that's why we aren't as effective as we could be. And we have to reach out from beyond our social circles. We have to get into other trusted communities. We have to have them understanding who we are and why we do what we do. But the most important thing might be amplification. It's a very simple step. What it means is that we need to be sharing with more people. The internet provides that perfect conduit. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. These are things that we all need to be involved, whether we like it or not. It needs to be part of every business, every operation. You need to be present in that space. Just because we can exploit it to share and share what others have shared. Write about simple things that happen. Share a picture of the operation. Talk about calving when it happens. Share that information. And then I'll share it for you with my group of science geeks and those folks, with the concerned moms who tune into what I say because they trust me. These are the folks that you can reach by using the conduits of social media. This is actually what a conversation looks like on Twitter. That bump in the bottom corner, that little node down here in the bottom left, put out a story on Medium that somebody shared and someone shared with this network. And all these other users found it because it was shared. Share the information from your industry groups. Share the information from Saskatchewan Beef. Share it through your networks to reach broader audiences. This has to be viral. The bad guys do it. They're masters of this, and it's their full-time job. But there's only a couple of them. If all of us could get on the same page and work with each other to share each other's information, this is how agriculture takes the upper hand, tells the truth, wins trust. That's what we can do. So share your information. I'm going to head to the home stretch here just because it's getting close to the top of the hour. The bottom line is that communicating the value of animal agriculture isn't someone else's responsibility. It's on you. And don't just defer it to your industry or the advocates and the folks who are out there trying to speak on behalf of animal agriculture. The industries, its representatives, its producers need to be parts of those conversations. The academics need to be parts of those conversations. Get them out of the laboratory and out of the, even the extension folks who are really good at communication. They need to be taking bigger roles in meeting the concerned consumer online, because the consumer doesn't know who to trust. We got to be there. The first part of the problem is stepping into it. and stepping into it, not being afraid of stepping into it. Remember, this is something we can control. We can't control the weather. We can't control the prices. We can't control the consumer demand necessarily right away. It's a long-term process of shaping perception by stepping into it and the part that we can help contribute to. That's how we can control it. So I started off talking about this Burger King commercial and how deeply gross and offensive it was. It was really bad. It was poor. It was all about, cows, exhaust pipes leading to climate change, and how this was methane was a poison that was, you got to wear a gas mask, right? The good news is there was a response to this. There was a response in a lot of ways, some of which I've captured here. These are mostly academics who talked about, what you're saying isn't true. And this is the stuff you need to be sharing. Even if you don't want to counter the information yourself, share Frank Mitloehner or Allison Van Eenenen. That's the way that we solve this problem. They're academics, they're trusted too. And they tell the truth here. Look how Frank does it. He says, nearly all enteric methane comes from the cattle from belching. Suggesting otherwise turns a serious climate topic into a joke. I share your values on climate, and you're taking away from that important conversation by making up false information. That can win the concerned consumer. Reducing methane is a huge opportunity. That should be the goal, but we trivialize it with trendy marketing. So basically, by saying this is a marketing ploy, it's an important important problem that I agree with you on, that using the other way to solve it makes more sense. You see why that's so effective. The last thing I'll close with is what Michelle Miller, Farm Babe, did. And I don't know, maybe many of you know Michelle, but she actually tweeted to Burger King and said, this is kind of not true. This is a problem. And they got back to her. And what she wrote in an article on Ag Daily says, thankfully it worked and they listened. They had a Zoom call. She said, put yourself in our shoes. When we in agriculture feel attacked, it's from food companies or activists. People have no idea what we do. It oftentimes we feel underappreciated. It'd be nice to have brands that thank us, showcase us, lift us up, don't tear us down. Without farmers, Burger King has no beef at all. That's the kind of messaging that we need. It turns out that they listened. And this tweet to Burger King, one 280 character thread on Twitter, got Burger King to respond. They put together a team that came out and visited farms. They visited beef operations or cattle operations, probably dairy operations in southwestern Wisconsin. They took part in feeding the animals, in touching the animals, understanding what animal agriculture was about. And they completely flipped on their messaging. They created additional media that talked about their appreciation for farmers and farming. They have videos on their YouTube stream now that are opposed to those first ones on methane, and they get a lot more shares and a lot more hits and a lot more thumbs up than the stupid one about the cows, farting out dangerous gas. Go there, find it, and share it. This is how we create that change. So the counterintuitive formula: take the time to listen to people. You have to listen to understand. You don't have to agree, but you have to understand where they're coming from and show them that you understand. Share your values, find a common ground and work from that. The intimacy that's required to create change comes from that common starting point. Talk about your why. Why do you do what you do? That's so much more compelling than the details of what. Propose solutions that appeal to those common values. We can do that. Remember that you can't change someone's mind, someone's emotional decisions with more data. You don't bring value, don't bring evidence to a values fight. Handle interaction with grace. Don't forget your real audience is not the idiot who's screaming at you in all caps. It's the people who are wondering who to trust. And when you come back with grace, tact, kindness, someone who's being abusive, you win. Think about how you can win those hearts and minds and treat the most abrasive people with respect. It's really hard to do sometimes, but it's amazing how great it works. get in there and engage. Get in there and tell people about the good things of animal agriculture. Create content and amplify the content of others. Even if you don't ever want to write or make a video or talk about your operation, share the work of those that do. That's how we change it. There's a lot more of us than there are of them. And just engaging correctly through the conduits where the controversies are being spawned is how we fix it. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much for the invitation. I wish I was there in person, but we'll do it again sometime in the future. Thank you very much. And I'm really happy to take questions.
Well, great. Because I hope, sometimes you give a good talk like that, Kevin, and it's a lot to take in, and like, oh, right, I gotta have some questions here, but we have.
Well, what's so funny about this is that apply great to our communication strategies in the area of animal agriculture or across agriculture. But these are skills that make us so much more effective in political conversations and other conversations of controversy. COVID-19. I give more talks about COVID these days than anything else because the same strategies apply.
One of the questions from Ann Thompson's side was, and I don't know if you're reading along, but she said, no, I'll be devil's advocate here. Why waste time trying to convert the unhappy? Do we do ourselves a better service by improving the experience of our current customers? Is this the wrong approach?
No, you're exactly right. You have to know the audience that you're trying to talk to. And when you'll spend a lot of time never changing somebody who's already made up their mind and is impervious to new information. I think where I talk about the necessity to engage them is in the social media space, where it's a public forum and it's a soapbox where lots of people are watching. This allows you to set up that contrast. Somebody pervious to information who's relying on disbar, kindly speaking from a place of values, saying, here's what's important to me, and here's what I know. And that is extremely effective. So it is important to engage. Don't think it doesn't matter.
So I kind of hear you talking like, if we envision ourselves at a trade show, the odd time it's pretty quiet, and one person might come up and just tell you that you're the devil for what you do, and there's nobody else around, and you might, you might engage them in conversation and not be able to get anything that is a two-way conversation. It's like, thanks for stopping by, but if there's you're going to try a lot longer and maybe say a few more things, recognizing that it's not going to sink in if there's a bigger crowd around them. And that's what social media is that bigger crowd that might hear your conversation.
Yeah, the best guidelines there, even in that one-on-one, is help me understand why you feel that way. And what would it take to change your mind? Those are my two questions that when I go nuclear, I just, help me understand why you feel that way. And make them articulated. And then basically with most of these things, you'll find out that you kind of do agree with them on most things, or they agree with you. Mm-hmm. The other one is what would it take to change your mind? And oftentimes they'll say, well, I wish that it was just that if animals would be treated this way. And you can say, yeah, but they are. That's what we do. Livestock these days have monitors in many cases, many scenarios, that monitor their every move and their physiology constantly. Their AI is starting to come into play in agriculture. So this is if it's already here. So these are things that help do motivate.
So how about tips? You touched on a little bit, we got to stop preaching to the choir sort of thing, but Lisa's asking about, do you have advice for reaching beyond that? You mentioned just pumping it out into, you said medium. I'm not sure if everybody knows what that means. We've got a lot of echo chambers, and online's really good for, if you want to, you can really curate yourself into making sure you're only going to talk to people that agree with you. How do you broaden that to be more effective?
Well, there's a couple ways to do that. And I hate echo chambers. If I want to listen to I don't want to listen to myself and people who agree with me. I want to find the people that need to have a change of heart and then get in there and try to affect them. And the easy way to do that is to try to find places that are kind of halfway. So if you're a beef producer and you have access to a cooking magazine, a cooking show, a online recipes that you can do, or providing beef to some sort of a chef or somebody, whatever it is. There's ways that you can reach those middle audiences by volunteering what you know or the products that you can produce, and then using that opportunity to inform that middle audience, getting outside the echo chamber. For the ways I do it all the time by engaging in other echo chambers, by going in there and saying, here's something I'm not quite comfortable with the way you're saying it. Help me understand where you're coming from, and let me tell you what I know. And actively taking those on. It's a great way to do it.
Beef producers can be pretty busy, so it's difficult to justify taking time off the farm. What do you think the payoff is for taking time on social media or going to the classroom? How do you? Can you measure it?
There is nobody I've ever talked to who said I've got plenty of time to do this. But the beauty of this is that if we all take a few minutes to do it, it builds the whole. And what's in it for us is what they refer to as social license. If as these alternatives and alternative meat products gain traction, and they will, I mean, it's kind of inevitable in a lot of ways. I wrote an article for Ag Daily you might want to check out. Let me cough here real quick about this. And they're not producing, ribeyes and strip steaks. They're making the things that are, like hot dogs and hamburgers. It's the sincerest form of flattery. They're trying to produce something that people enjoy. Remind them of what the real thing is. Don't criticize that product. Talk about the good things that your product brings. And these are conversations we're going to be entering into more and more as time goes on, because there's going to be more and more pressure, just because technology allows us to impersonate your product better and better all the time.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that. There's a couple kudos along the sides to you for about bringing up that hearts versus heads concept, and some people talking about their experience with that, and some pats on your back. I guess you're not here for people to come up after the conference and say, "Oh, I really enjoyed that." But
well, too bad you wouldn't get to buy me a beer later. That's right? always the good part about being the scientist at the conference. People, let me get you an ice cream. All right. No, plus the best part was always meeting people who were at the conference who had more questions, because I made a lot of great contacts that way over the years. So, certainly if there's anything I can do for you, reach out. I gave my contact information at the end, and I'd love to talk to you more. We can do a Zoom call if you have more questions or interest.
Oh, wonderful. I mean, meeting on your end would be better at this time of year than meeting on our end. There is a question about what do we do if they block content that doesn't fit their narrative?
Yeah, that's the unfortunate side of this, is the blocking of content, and there's not much you can do about that. What I always do is I use someone else's blocking and aggression to my advantage, and I take lots of screenshots. That when I see something is going that direction, I'll take screenshots of it, especially if I respond to something with the science and say, well, no, you're not quite right. Here's what it is. And they want to keep that off their page. I'll take a screenshot of it going into the box where it goes before it's moderated, or once it appears on the site before it's removed. And I will put on Twitter or Facebook, earlier I corrected this disinformation and they blocked that content from appearing. And I'll bring in the other folks who are on that page, because what it shows to those people who are in the middle, the people who are looking for who to trust, that maybe we should trust the scientist guy, because these folks feel so unable to answer that comment or that idea, that they're blocking it. They don't want us to have access to that information. That erodes their trust. That's how we win.
Interesting. Well, so you call yourself the research community. There's a question here about how would we encourage the research community on empathy aspects, and also promote to them about the importance of social media to reach out to people with correct information. I mean, there's Frank, there's a few of you around that are kind of stars of the talk circuit that we like to lean on, but how do you spread that, push out the good that folks?
Yeah, this is turning a aircraft carrier. This is a tough one. So the deal is that universities in general don't, they say they do, but they don't prioritize this kind of stuff. A year ago, I was supposed to speak at Alberta Beef, and my university actually banned me from doing it. I mean, seriously, they told me you're not going. And there are folks within universities that don't like aspects of some areas of science. They may not be scientists, whatever. I don't control that. But it's also not prioritized in terms of tenure and promotion. So they're not giving us extra gold stars by doing this. And if anything, it can cause the university hassles with, public records requests and huge expense. I mean, it's such a drag. So they don't necessarily encourage us to do this. The good news is that new faculty who come in do understand the value of this because they grew up with social media. And, these are folks that are in their late 20s, early 30s who know how powerful this medium can be. And they can be reached and they are eager to participate. So it's gradually changing, not by changing the opinions of the older folks, but by sending them out the door and bringing in the new blood.
That forest doesn't look the same way because it's all new trees. Hey, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, well, great. It's we're running here to our break time, and I got to thank you on behalf of we've got almost 150 people here. Just glad to hear your messages. It really dovetails well with what we heard yesterday from Michelle. And but it isn't just telling us something, it's charging us with something to get out there and engage. So I took a few notes on some things to look into, and I'm sure there's a few people. We had a panel yesterday with some people that are doing exactly what you talked about, and that's
Good.
great to see that we're not starting at zero here, but lots of good stuff there. Thanks again for making the time and joining us today, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you. And please, anybody reach out if I can be of assistance. I'm always very happy to help. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Have a great break, and we'll see you next year somewhere.
Wonderful. Take care.
Take care.
Well, here we are. It's I got my clock at 2:17, and the schedule I see has us starting our panel at 2:25. So let's take a little break. I'm sure you might need to walk down the hall wherever you're at, and we'll get started in a little bit. Thanks for interacting along the side panel, and keep that up for the next panel. Talk to you shortly. Well, there, folks. We'll get back going again here. We've got the panel. Seeing, and John just entered the room, so we're going to get moving on to our panel on the long-term implications of COVID-19 on the food chain. And this is brought to you by our friends at Farm Credit Canada, and much appreciative of that sponsorship. One of the things I did want to point out before we get rolling here, we've talked about the chat piece, and you can put your things in there and everybody gets to see it. But you know, one of the things we're not getting to do is that that side conversation with each other that we probably look forward to this time of year from our SBIC people that we might only see that one time a year. So, you know, you can go in there and you can click on, instead of it going to everyone, you can click on that little everyone and it'll show you the names of all the people there. So maybe you take a time to say hello to that somebody that we're not getting a chance to see there today. It's you know, today's Bell Let's Talk Day, and some of those connections are really important for our mental health, whether it's family or friends we see all the time, or some of the connections that we have that are just, you know, once in a while, people that I know the industry friends that I've built through this job and my job before it are from parts of my life. So wanted to point that functionality out for anybody who hasn't been using it. But to get right to it, we've got Michael Young from Canada Beef joining us, John Lawton from Titan Livestock, and Tyler Bjornson from JBS. And there he is. And we'll get their cameras fired up and get to talking about the long-term implications of COVID-19 and what we're going to see from that. And maybe we'll start first by having you guys just introduce yourselves a little bit and talk about your outfit a little bit for those of us, you know, who haven't heard of places like JBS and and those kinds of things. But maybe when I look at my my screen and how you guys are on it, Tyler, you're on the first part of the clock, so I'll get you to go first, and then Michael, and then John.
Sure. Thanks, Ryder. Good to see you. Thanks for having me out here. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Tyler Bjornson. I grew up on a grain and livestock farm in New Norway, Alberta. Did a long time ago, several decades ago, I went to the U of A and Carleton University in Ottawa. I stayed there. I worked for government doing mainly trade negotiations. Did a stint as a senior political advisor as well. And then I left government and I worked in a couple of different roles in the private sector, in an industry association, and for a large agribusiness doing global government relations. And for the past 10 years, I've been running a small outfit on my own, helping out agricultural organizations with their interactions with government, both here at home and abroad. And I've had the good fortune to represent JBS Food Canada since they took over the Brooks plant in 2013. I think many of you will know very well what it is that JBS does and all about us. I'd be happy to answer any other questions if there are any. But I've also been representing them at the Canadian Meat Council's Beef and Veal Committee, which I happen to currently chair as well. So I'm looking forward to the conversation here today.
Great, thanks. Michael?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Young. For those of you who don't know, I'm the president of Canada Beef. I've been around a while, quite a while actually. A butcher by trade, and then I sort of learned marketing when I realized I needed more than $12 an hour to feed my family. I've split my career over the last 40 years. Half of it's been with the pork sector, and the other half's been with the beef sector. And I'm absolutely delighted. I've been back now. It'll be 2 years in April. And I have to say, it's never a dull moment. In the meat business. And I'm looking forward to many more years of serving the sector. So thank you.
Great. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'm John Watt with Titan Livestock. I've been in the cattle business all of my life, and Raised up at Knighton Junction, farmed with my grandfather and my parents when I started out in family farm right from grandfather homesteaded in 1930. So we're been active for a long time in agriculture. We've been focusing the last 30 years or so. I've been pretty focused in the cattle feeding industry, and we do our best to stay engaged and be proactive in trying to keep everything working as smooth as we can. And I think things like this are really good to keep engaged with the public and government. So I think this is really good.
Well, great. Well, yeah, thanks. It's there's a few calls and emails fired around trying to as the committee that works on SBIC talked about, well, what should we have? What can we have? And does, with this virtual format, I think that lent itself a little bit we captured a little bit wider of a footprint than maybe we would have in convincing people to come join us in Saskatoon. But you know, we did fire you a few questions to prepare for this a little bit, but I'm as much as anything looking forward to the questions that we get from our participants here. But you know, one of those first questions was around, you know, looking at some of the interesting graphs and graphics we've seen around the world, you know, and greenhouse gas output has kind of, you know, fell off as we went through this last year of COVID and changed our behaviors, and yet we're still, you know, raising the same amount of cattle, and they're still doing what cattle do. So it seems to tell a positive story about our greenhouse gas emissions and their share of things. But that said, we don't get to just do nothing. And is there, you know, what would you say to people who are saying, well, so how has your sector of the industry been doing on this carbon footprint thing, and what are you doing as a company maybe to adapt to that? I made Tyler go first, maybe.
Sure. Yeah, sorry about that.
Anybody else could go first after.
Yeah, actually, Ryder, I'm really glad that you asked this question. It's not one that we typically spend a lot of time talking about publicly, but actually, the last few years, JBS Brooks has been really dialed in on driving down GHG emissions at our facility. With the wastewater lagoon emissions are by far the largest aspect of our GHG footprint. So we've actually made major investments to both dramatically reduce our water usage per head, significantly improve the quality of that wastewater that's going out to the lagoons, doing things like removing as much yellow grease as possible through improved centrifuge processes and things of that nature. And actually, we're just wrapping up a multi-year biogas capture and flare project that included a purpose-built, brand new anaerobic lagoon, which has just come online here in end of December, January. So those are all like really significant investments that we've done since 2014. And if you can believe it, all of these things combined have resulted in some pretty transformational improvements at that site. On GHGs, that would be an anticipated 70% reduction in GHG emissions at the Brooks site in comparison to where we were at when we arrived in 2013, and roughly a 50% reduction in the water usage per head. So this is a really critical topic, not just from a public trust point of view, but also to position the industry to be able to remain competitive in the face of what I'm sure a lot of people will appreciate, maybe some pretty stiff regulatory requirements that could be coming our way if we didn't act now. So yeah, that's what's going on at Brooks. A pretty big agenda for us on the GHG footprint side. I would say, you know, if we had lots of time, I would say I'd love to talk about soil and water more as well, because we've got some pretty significant investments in those areas as well.
You sound like a proud parent there. That's good, Tyler. Michael, could you talk about some of the partners you work with? What are you seeing out there?
Sure. I mean, typically on this one, Ryder, I would generally defer to, to the delivery system, meaning, ranchers and feedlot operators and processors. But, what I can say is that the Canadian industry has a great story to tell. It's always been a part of our value proposition, or the Canadian beef advantage. So as it develops, as it matures, and as the narrative changes, we are adapting the messaging we take out. So it's a part of everything we say and everywhere we say it in multiple languages. So it's a great story. We have a great story to say, and we want to say it as loud and as often as we possibly can. So, I guess to add to that, we've got a quality perceptions audit going into the global field shortly. And on that, it ranks how important some of these issues are by market. This is important for us because we want to know by market which are the drivers they're interested in, so that we can tweak that messaging to make sure that we have everything we need to cover that aspect off. So, it's an important part of what the industry does. And, as you pointed out, it's interesting that, emissions went down, cattle production hasn't. So that does tell a story.
Yeah, no kidding. How many markets are you shooting at with that?
Well, so, I mean, we have all of our main offices. So we have 2 offices in China. We have an office in Japan, office in Mexico. And then we have a Southeast Asia office based in Taiwan that does all of Southeast Asia. Now, on top of that, we also do, one-off and ad hoc stuff like in EU and things like that. So whenever we're putting together a seminar or we're presenting information or we're at a trade show, those pillars are there, and our environmental footprint is a big part of the story.
Great, thanks. John?
No, I think that the cattle feeding industry actually has been doing a big part of trying to increase efficiencies and cut down on greenhouse gas emissions wherever possible. We're using micro machines, so in most of the major feed yards now. So that's one little point where we're cutting down on the loads of supplement that are getting hauled up and down the road. We're improving, a lot of the yards are going to RCC based pens. It's cutting down on material handling inside the yard, increasing
I'd say roller compacted concrete.
Yeah, roller compacted concrete. So that increases, that helps with greenhouse gas emissions. We're utilizing feedstuffs that can't be utilized in human consumption. That is definitely leading to reduction of greenhouse gas. So I think in general, like we're constantly looking for ways to find cattle and feedstuffs that are low. We have to be low cost producers. We have to compete with every other food in the world. So we are always working towards that.
Well, and this is one that I've kind of struggled with, or sometimes I think explained to people, is that, that thing that lowered the greenhouse gas also now costs me less or improved my operation by that. Like, we've been looking for those kinds of efficiencies since ever. And it's a hard one to.
It's not a new story. It's a new title. We've
right?
been doing that all the way along. So
sometimes we have to take credit for doing good things.
Yeah, one small thing that we're doing is like there's a lot of these a lot of the beef that we produce now it comes from the dairy herd. Like, we're actually utilizing a cow for milk production and beef production at the same time. No one makes note of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty efficient.
Yeah.
Hey, Ryder, you throwing on my National Beef Advisors hat here for a second. There's also very considerable acres of grassland under farmer rancher stewardship that is sequestering a ton of carbon. We got to get that story out as well, right? Like that's a really important piece to recognize and acknowledge a lot of the good work that's going on already in the sector. So, you know, good to hear, you know, things that John is talking about. I know there's good things going on at the producer level, and we're doing our best to cut back on that footprint for a variety of reasons. And you know, it's yeah, this is an important topic.
Just one more, and maybe it's not fair to ask you this, Michael, but you interact with more retailers than the rest of us. I get a little bit grumpy when we say, well, the greenhouse footprint of cattle is such. And then I walk through on a summer's day, one of the nicest places to be is a grocery store, and walking along those nice open coolers. And that just makes me like, tell me about that footprint. I guess you know, you hear Australia, they don't refrigerate their eggs. Well, you know, is there ground to be made up there that we're not?
You know, I'd be careful, I think, to point fingers, especially at our, you know, end user customers. But I mean, you do bring up a good point, and at some level, it would be nice to stand back and, you know, have people look at this more of a sensible view rather than you know, it's easy just to point at this and say, well, you know what, the cows are doing it. Well, the cows aren't doing it, you know, and last time I checked, I think you were pretty hungry. So I mean, we'll see how that plays out. Again, I think one of the things COVID has done is maybe it's taken the attention of some other things away, and people are focusing a little bit more on some of the fundamentals in their life. And hopefully that glow will continue after we get past this, and they can appreciate, you know, some of the things they had before that maybe they were taking a little bit for granted, you know.
Right on. Yep. There's definitely been some of that appreciation. From your business's point of view, how do you think the governments, both provincial and federal, have handled the crisis and the impacts on our industries? Is there anything different you'd like to have seen done, or is still on your list that you're hoping will unfold? And I won't make you go first this time, Tyler. Maybe I'll start with John. We'll go back the other way.
No, I'm appreciative of what they've done when they came out with the set aside program, but it was slow to get going, and I think that they have to be more engaged or proactive. I think the set aside concept was a good concept, but it's something that we should have there at all times for this type of crisis. It should be something that we can, so much of the time we have political risk, health scares, that we need just some stopgap measures to help get us through to the other side, a month to 2 months, and can help control the flow of the cattle that are set up to be harvested every week. And I'm a little disappointed that they've walked away from that concept, saying that we're all free and clear. Well, as last I checked, the COVID risks are as high as ever, and we're very vulnerable going forward. And by the time they gear the program up again, if needed, there will be significant hurt in the industry. So we are, as an industry, we're shouldering a lot of the risk for the consumer and the packer. Like we're putting a lot of cattle on feed. We've got probably $2-3 billion invested in Western Canada, and a lot of that is being carried. That the risk of those commodities is being carried on the shoulders of cow-calf and cattle feeding industry. And I think that government should take a little more responsibility in helping shoulder some of that risk. And we're negotiating with the packer every day, trying to offset some of that risk with them. But it's a big load that we carry.
Good. Michael, what have you seen or thought of?
Well, I think with, like in all business, COVID hit really hard and fast. and nobody really was prepared for this. Probably, you know, we had some good experiences with BSE back in the day. For those of you who went through that, that's why I have gray hair now. And I think a lot of that helped us to mobilize the cattle groups quicker than some of the other groups, and that was definitely a plus. But I think the governments, all levels of the government, they did struggle with trying to keep up with the urgencies. I mean, and I understand that there was a lot of urgencies spread across the entire delivery system. But, you know, I would agree with John. There was a bit of a lag. It was almost 3 months, I think, which, you know, I think in looking back, it would have been nice if we had that a little sooner than later. Looking forward, you know, you've got to learn. If it doesn't kill you, it's going to make you stronger. And I got to believe that a lot of lessons have been learned for the latter half of this pandemic. And if this happens to us again, I hope we're going to be in a better position to deal with it, and that we could roll out these sort of foundational programs sooner than later, because, you know, this is essential food production in this country, and it's important. So
that's why I challenge, like, why has it been pulled off the table sharply? Like, basically put on the back burner. Like, they could have left that program sitting there for us to use when needed. For sure, the next year we've got large risk to us. So rather than try to bring it back off the shelf and then just let it sit there, we could respond much quicker.
Yep. Tyler, what would you add? What have you seen? And you've got some experience being in some of those decision-making rooms in government. And
yeah, it was definitely out of the fire into the frying pan. You know, I think I'd start by saying we've never managed a beef plant through a global pandemic before, right? So, and I think we recognize that governments are definitely in the same boat. They've never done this either. Was it perfect? No, far from it. You know, of course not. And I don't want to make light of any of the issues that other segments are facing, because I think, you know, John and Michael make very good points. But you know, truthfully, as a global player, you know, this could have been a lot worse in Canada. We had colleagues in other countries that had plants down for weeks and weeks. And can you imagine what would have happened here in Canada in that sort of a scenario? So we had a really serious public health challenge, as everyone knows, on our hands. And we were doing everything possible to fight the spread, keep our team members as safe as possible, and still, you know, taking cattle and putting beef on store shelves. And, you know, I think that was coming at a time when most Canadians, I think, would say they were pretty nervous about COVID, not only from their own health and safety point of view, but just whether or not food supply chains would be shutting down or resilient enough. And overall, I think, you know, we did pretty good as a supply chain, all things considered. It could have been better. There could have been better response from government. I think if we zeroed in on like our interaction with the government, it did show us a few things. And a really critical piece in my mind is just how fast government can actually act if they put their mind to it. Like, we've got issues and topics that I think everyone knows have been on, I hesitate to say on the back burner. They've been like way off in the back pantry or something. They've been sitting there for years and years, right, with no satisfactory resolution. And this pandemic showed us that government can do very transformative things in a relatively short period of time when they want to. And I think we don't want them to revert back to the old terrible red tape bureaucratic ways once the pandemic is under control. So I think we need to somehow encourage that. And then secondly, this whole experience is really, in my mind, shone a spotlight on the importance of the food sector in our country, and that, you know, it's an opportunity that we press government to take their rhetoric seriously about agriculture and agribusiness being an important part of the economy in the country. And sometimes I feel, and I'm sure many of you at the conference here feel like nobody's listening, and our concerns aren't being taken seriously. And this has shown that government can be much more responsive. So there's definitely a culture shift that's required to be more sort of industry conscious and understanding the big challenges that we face from time to time. And I'm hoping that we can see some momentum in that culture shift. I think it's a very difficult thing to do, but I know that there are some people in government that we were working with that really did do everything they could to help out at a very difficult time. So yeah, it's not perfect, of course not. There were all kinds of challenges, but I see some opportunities here as well.
Yeah, breaking that stereotype of, if you're action oriented, we can get that out if you come work for us at government is something that I hope we can, put behind us. Just to clear the side, there was some agreement there when we were talking about cattle, and greenhouse gases, and just around genetics, how genetics are helping around our feed efficiency and just the performance of our animals on what we're able to do per head is definitely something to recognize. A nice graphic shared by Tracy Herbert, and some support for what you were saying about risk there from Chad. Great point you made there. So the next question I got is, as a result of the lockdowns and concerns around the spread, that's really changed where and what people eat. Can you talk about what that's meant for what you do or how you do it, or decisions that are coming at you that are fallout from that? What are you seeing? Maybe I'll get you to go first this time, Michael.
You said me, Ryder?
Yes, please.
Oh, great. Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously the impact has dramatically affected how consumers shop and buy and prepare. And this has also affected how the delivery system has to interact with them. So it's really changed kind of the whole paradigm. And I mean, right from the top down, the primary and secondary processors are all reimagining how they fit into the mix. How do they make that connection? How do they fill that gap that in this now kind of a contactless kind of a business scenario? Retail chains now are all exploring new ideas. We've got categories emerging that were just, they were barely beginning to take off before, but now they're real. HMR is taking off, delivery, home meal replacement systems, meal kits. I mean, all of these things are changing, and everyone says they're here to stay. People like this delivery system. So, we've got to look at how people are getting it. The shift from retail to food service has caused both a challenge and an opportunity for the delivery system, in that, we had a nice balance, and we had a predictable balance. Certain times of the year, food service would draw on other items, other countries would draw on other items. COVID kind of changed that whole balance of things. So it's been quite an adjustment for the packing side to adjust to opportunities for cuts that may not have been popular in this sector, but now there's an opportunity, and also to pick up the slack on some of the cuts that generally would have gone into food service that are now, need to get funneled through the retail sector. So that's presented quite a challenge for everyone. I guess the biggest thing is what I call kitchen captive consumers. They're now back in the kitchen more than ever. They're cooking for their families. They're spending time together. They're eating while they're preparing much bigger meals now. So they're reaching out for information, not just basic information, but everything. Like our websites, we're monitoring what they're looking at. So we know the areas that, especially certain age groups are weak in. But we know they're asking us for more information on how to cook our products, different ways of using it, how to utilize leftovers is an interesting one. We're getting a lot of comments about what do I do with leftovers, because they're also all on a really, really tight food budget, which is the other thing that impacts it. When you think about it, we're the most expensive protein out there, other than, maybe local lamb. And and we've got a lot of tight food budgets. So we need to make sure the beef assortment has value-based items for every level of shopper out there. So that's a challenge as well for us. Yeah, the other thing, I guess, and that's been extended. I mean, you can take those trends and extend them to every market we're in the export market as well. They're a little ahead of us because their food service sector is starting to come back, but the balance was affected exactly the same way. So yeah, it's really changed the way we do business, and I think it's here to stay. Parts of it are here to stay. And there are opportunities with any challenge. There's an opportunity if you can see it, and there definitely are opportunities for this sector to move ahead, and we're gonna take full advantage of that.
So, are these meal kits, these home meal replacements, do they lend themselves to beef? I mean, we've lamented the convenience of the chicken breast and the chicken wing for a long time. Is there the beef? Yeah, is this positive for beef, or are we watching it pass by?
As I said, it's a challenge, Ryder, because as you know, we're starting with a much larger piece, and if you're breaking it down to an actual meal kit, it's not a roast anymore or a large steak. You're down to a single portion serving, and usually the meal kits, some of them are aimed at more of a foodie level where it's a bit of a complicated recipe, but most of them are kind of entry level, easy to fix, convenient, and that does lend itself up front better on chicken items. So we are challenged to get more beef items that are HMR friendly, and we are working with the further processing side to get that, get those portion sizes down, get the meat cut properly so that what the customer is getting, or get the information they need to make sure the meat performs the way we would like it to do. So it's a challenge for us. We're not as represented as the others, but we see the opportunity. We know the demand's there. I mean, beyond burgers are still on the takeout side. All of the banners are still saying that burgers are the number one, both on the quick service retail food service side. That's the number one takeout item. We still own that category, but as you know, we've got a lot of beef cuts that we'd like to make sure that are well represented. So we're aware of it. We're building strategies to deal with it so that we are in there.
And how is that affecting JBS and what goes out on the liners from you guys, Tyler?
Yeah, Michael covered a lot of it, but yeah, we had to make some significant adjustments, especially in sort of that March through June period last year. There was obviously a immediate dramatic reduction in restaurant demand and all the major lockdowns. And we also saw, even in the face of lockdowns, we saw major swings with retail demand, and, week to week, sometimes day to day, through this pandemic, and then an absolute yo-yo at times on the international sales. So this, there was a good 4, 5, 6 month stretch in 2020 that was pretty painful to try to manage. And as Michael mentioned, what you could rely on as solid demand for certain cuts pre-COVID just evaporated overnight. And you can't keep cutting if you're not able to deal with some of those cuts. So I think we are highly appreciative of the innovation that we're starting to see now, like both, Michael was talking about the home kits and the innovation on the retail side. I'd say also the innovation on the takeout side of things as well. Like not even just the meal preparation, it's all of the apps and the delivery methods and all those sorts of things. People are actually starting to figure out now how to get a restaurant style meal in the face of the lockdowns, and it'll be really interesting to see whether or not a lot of these innovations are long-term trends, and to what extent those innovations in delivery and the comfort level of people to order online and be more accepting of those sorts of things is also a big question mark right now. So we're a long ways from being out of the woods, as they say, on this topic. There's much more to come, but we're starting to see a glimmer of some opportunity here, and we've got some work to do, but there's absolutely opportunity. We just we're still right in the thick of COVID, right? Like it feels like we're not, but the reality is, just look at the measures that are in place. It's still a very difficult situation.
And you're also dealing with people challenges too. Like, is that your mix of available workers? How is that? Has COVID been? There's people that are not doing this. Are they showing up to work at JBS? How is there even having the people to do the work that you need doing? Has that been affected, Tyler?
Yeah, that was probably one of the scariest challenges that we had, is just, do we have enough people to run the shift in an hour, right? And making 11th hour calls on whether or not we were going to run a shift or a day, very, very difficult in the early days. I think now that we've taken so many measures and really ramped up as much as we can, health and safety and care of team members, I think everyone feels pretty comfortable coming to work now. And so it's just a different, even though we're still in lockdown, and all measures are in place, and we don't have any plans to pull any of those away in the foreseeable future. I think many of those are permanent. I think there's a greater level of comfort from our team members than there was when this first hit, when people had more questions than answers. So as this goes on, I think there's more and more comfort as we get better at this. And of course, now the buzz is all about when do people get vaccinated, and how does that roll out, and who gets the jab first, right? Like all those sorts of things. All I know, Ryder, is I'm probably last in line.
Well, I feel like I should be too, but the people who work in that plant, I'd like them to be right at the front.
Yeah, that's the point we've been making, is, these are essential businesses. These are folks that are on the front line, ensuring that that food goes on Canadians' plates, and we all get to enjoy without worry our meals. That they should be high up on the priority list. Along with, there's lots of folks in that category. So, and they're not government relations guys.
Yeah, those guys. John, lots of conversation here about the changes. Has that changed what signals and messages you're getting, and how you should be finishing out cattle?
I actually am quite encouraged by all the changes that we have made. Like, yes, we have adapted quickly at the plant level, at the feedlot level, our interaction with our workers, the plant's workers, we're all taking extra precautions to maintain a constant supply. And on the adaptations on taking the product out to the consumer in a new format is very positive to me. Actually, I see demand. If you look at the numbers, the demand is great for beef, and really, I think we're gaining ground in a troubling time. So if we add restaurants when they do open back up, we're teaching the consumer how to handle beef at home in different formats, different ways to take it on. And then if you add the restaurants back on, we could have some pretty explosive demand going forward. So I'm quite optimistic and obviously the market in general is pretty optimistic. And I think that's a lot of it, is we're seeing we've adapted, and I think for the better, for the consumer, for the producers. And I think what we're seeing is very positive going forward.
Great.
It's interesting, Ryder, when this started, and it became obvious that a lot of people have really, really tight food budgets. It's really a testament to the quality of the product when you saw how much beef was actually being consumed. When it came down to the crunch where people thought maybe there's going to be a food shortage in this country, what did they go for? I mean, yeah, they got the toilet paper and they got the shampoo, but you know what? They loaded up beef like it was going out of style, and it was not cheap. I mean, you know, supply and demand kicked in, and the pricing was reflective of that. And people had no problem paying a premium to get the items they thought they were going to need for their freezers. So, you know, that's a testament to the quality of the product, and it does paint a picture for, you know, we can maintain this, we can hang on to this, which we certainly plan on doing. And I think we're going to come out of this with a bigger and a wider market share. That's our goal.
Ryder, do you think participants would be interested in hearing a little bit about COVID measures that we've taken at the plant? Just as
I think there is a little curiosity there, Tyler. Yeah, just, I mean, we're all tucked into our little corners and we see a little bit at restaurants and whatnot. I do in the city, but it's all legend for what's been happening in the plant. So yeah, a little bit of peeking behind the curtain would be great.
Sure. Well, so we actually started monitoring as a management team the COVID situation in January of 2020. Obviously, we've got international sales, we've got people around the world. So we started monitoring on a daily basis the situation on COVID and started putting in mitigation measures. Within 2 months, we had over 100 different mitigation measures. You know, looking at everything from the basics like masks, shields, sanitizer station, like touchless sanitizer stations, the partitions that you've probably seen in some of our the graphics that we've shared, to much more major initiatives like adjusting the workflow patterns, both in terms of the actual line itself, as well as just how employees move from one area of the plant to another, where it used to be two-way, and then all of a sudden it's not. We've got a one-way sign now on all those sorts of things, and that was significant when you're talking about plants where there's very limited space and it can be quite tight. From, you know, the way that it was designed. You know, we've also made major adjustments and build out of break rooms, cafeteria space, like we're making those permanent. We obviously got tents in there right away, so we had additional break space, but that's not in the middle of February in Brooks. That's not a long-term solution. So yeah, we've been very busy on that side. We've added numerous bodies to permanent to our health division within the JBS family at Brooks. We've got thermal imaging equipment that checks, touchless checks team members' health when they're arriving, and any guests and visitors. Separation of different areas from reception and arrival to receival on the cattle side, like where you've got separate washrooms, separate break areas, all that sort of thing. For there's separate between fabrication and the harvest side, all those types of things, all the way to actually we had a major project on our parking lot. Anybody that's been to the facility there knows that it's a heck of a walk from the parking lot to the reception area. And so we had a major build out of the parking lot and putting in new sidewalks with partitions so that people coming off shift weren't meeting people coming on shift. Like things like that you just wouldn't worry about in the normal world were things that were very potential risks around community spread for people just coming and going to work. So a lot of work done on that side. We're pretty proud of where we're at now, and the fact that we were able to operate. It was, you know, throughout, it was touch and go there for a while. But needless to say, lots has changed, and you know, from our perspective, most of that, let me rephrase that, all of it is for the better.
Well, Tyler, I remember taking, you read about different things about assembly lines and, or workspaces where, just by moving the garbage can from here over to here, we were able to reduce errors by 2.8%. Like that was just a little thing. You're talking about doing a whole bunch of things in an environment that's very regimented. Are you running at 80% of what you were before, or 100%, or how has that affected how the plant has been able to chug along?
Yeah, I think obviously you want to run at capacity, and you don't want to cut back on that. And through 2020, that was a big challenge as we were struggling and making our way through that. But I think we've figured it out now to the point where we just don't have the same capacity concerns that we had in the middle of it when we were going through all these adaptations.
That really strikes to how impressive that is, because it is such a regimented workspace, and every time you change something just a little bit, it could have quite a bit of fallout. So that's really interesting.
In a really short period of time, right? Like it is incredible, and we worked hand in glove with Alberta Public Health. Like I got to say that they were excellent. They were a really important partner for us through all of this, and our team members on the engineering side and the public health side, and like making daily suggestions for improvements, which were on a dime acted upon. Anytime anyone gave us like strong advice on something, we didn't wait. We didn't ask how much is that. We just did it because it was the right thing to do, and that was the best advice at the time. So yeah, definitely not normal management scenario.
So we're all in Canada here. We're seeing some lockdown stuff even continue or get worse. Provincial borders are being, enforced, but we can't eat our way out of the beef that we produce. So how are we addressing our international customers, and how has that changed, and are we going to be losing out in those markets, or what have you done differently or seen being done differently to maintain those relationships? Anything you can speak to on that one, fellas?
Who do you want to go first?
The one who wants to talk.
I can
Tyler just talked for a while, so give him a break.
Okay. I can start. So, fortunately for Canada Beef, we've got offices in the foreign market. So that really helps because we've got relationships in place, and they're going through the situation just like marketers are, in market. So that really does help. Some of the major shifts, though, are the same ones we're seeing here. Specifically, in the trade shows. In Asia, trade shows are a really big part of our marketing strategy, and they've, virtually, all of them were canceled. A couple of them went ahead anyway, but most of them switched over to virtual, and it's caused a lot of challenges for us to fit in with the right content in time, because as this hit, all of a sudden you're notified that you no longer. You're going to be part of a virtual show, but you no longer have a booth. So all of a sudden we needed to develop resources that were contactless virtual video in a hurry. we don't want to not be there, so we had to work really hard. So fortunately, we had the expertise in Canada to work with the foreign offices to get our materials converted over so that we can meet these challenges. The other one was a big part of our marketing strategy is product sampling, especially in Asia. It is, it's almost a table stake when you're doing business in Japan or China in a high-end retailer. It's part of every promotional conversation. You provide demo services, so that we can sample your product. You can have someone there to talk about your product. That's gone now because of COVID. So we had to find a way to communicate this information without demos. So we kind of pivoted our approach and focused more on the development of point of purchase materials, shelf talkers, danglers, things like that would still say what we want to say, to the consumer and standing in front of the meat case. So that's been a challenge for us. The other one, and I'll talk about this a little later too, because it applies to domestic, but really the adaptation of QR codes has been absolutely huge. Asia has always been ahead of us in that. So we have started using QR codes to attach to our technical marketing materials, for instance. And then we've got a couple of partner programs with some of the packers. So they're now producing features and benefit sheets, specification, resources that are meant for a business to business relationship. But on that would be a QR code, and that QR code would take the reader exactly to where the packer wanted them to go in whatever language they wanted them to read. So this has really shortened the gap in communication. And it's, sort of one of these little blessings that were kind of buried, where we didn't use it much before, but now everybody's using it. And it's something that will shape our future for sure.
Interesting. Guys, anything to add there, Tyler or John?
Yeah. For us, certainly the biggest change wasn't being able to meet face to face with customers, and that took a bit of getting used to in the first few months. But when I was talking to our head of international sales about this, he said, we've really hit our stride now and adapted to bringing in a lot of virtual interaction. That's been able to overcome a lot of the challenges of not being able to meet in person. But it's the new customer relations that's the hardest, because you're trying to build trust and doing that over a video call in comparison to spending time together, maybe having lunch and dinner together, and getting down and talking in a casual way is about building trust, and that is certainly more difficult. But that being said, I think many of our long-term customers would agree that the move to virtual has actually been terrific in a lot of ways. It's really cut down on a lot of time demands and cost, because each other. You've been working together for years. Do we really need to spend 3 days flying back and forth and all this? And so people, I think that's one thing that's absolutely going to remain, is much less reliance upon face-to-face for longer term relations. It doesn't replace the things that Michael was talking about in terms of demonstration and things of that nature. That's still got to happen. But I think there's a lot of efficiencies that we're going to see in that, especially on the international side, where you can chew up an entire week just going to Tokyo, right? Given all of the time and travel commitment to do that. And so you can't, if you're doing that 5 or 6 times a year because they're an important customer, man, that's a huge time commitment. Now maybe you only need to do that once or twice a year instead of 5. That's going to be I think a big improvement on our side.
Yeah. I mean, I get through Costco a lot quicker because I can't have samples now. I don't think that's a positive, but it is a reality. But John, did you have any comment? I mean, cattle flows going north and south. Have you seen that affected? I've had some interaction with people that, as long as you're doing business and you can show that you're doing food and agriculture business,
definitely doing business.
Been okay.
Yeah, we're definitely doing business both directions, which is good and shows where the markets are working. So I'm pretty excited about what I hear about the QR codes, even to the consumer level. Like they're talking about the packer using it to communicate with middlemen, but I think we take it from the retail from what I'm hearing is the next step is taking it from the retailer to the consumer. We have direct access to that consumer. They live on their phones nowadays. So we can get a pretty strong message if they scan a package of meat, where you go anywhere now, when restaurants are open, you can't even get a menu. You grab a QR code on your phone. People are getting very used to using these QR codes. And I think we can send some really positive messages on how to prepare, how to utilize product. And if we play it right, I really think this is a huge opportunity for the beef industry to play.
Great.
Communication domestically and internationally.
Well, I've enjoyed the heck out of this, but unfortunately we're coming up to our time. Our next speaker has joined us. Mike is in the room, so we've got a few minutes for a break. I did see a couple questions that one is, when can we expect JBS Brooks to get VBP plus verification? That'd be for you, Tyler.
Well, I think that's in large part a question around when can we get significant demand for that product, right? Like that's what it boils down to. And you have to look at those large scale customers that currently have that demand, have relationships with certain packers, and so they're going to fulfill that demand when they've got, you know, large scale customers that are wanting that particular product. So I think, you know, that's not a flippant answer. I think that's the truth for that. But that being said, we're very active in the sustainability space, and you know, keeping a very close eye on that and how we can take advantage of the fact that Canada actually has a good story to tell on that side of things.
Thank you. So just a question about how QR codes work. Can they just unload a video if you know, I've had my menu pull up, but yeah, it can go to whatever you want, or?
Well, it is great, John. You've got to be reading our mail because we have created what we call a QR code gateway. And within that strategy, we have identified a path forward for us. What you're going to see is an actual QR code for every single beef cut we're aware of, and everyone we could possibly think of bringing into the system. So we're going to actually populate a library based on a sort of a response system. This is going to be a web-based system, but essentially getting a QR code on that retail package in the form of printed on their price tag is what our goal is. And that's the first way. There are other ways, but that's ideally the best way. The smallest size used to be 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters, which fits perfect. You can actually make it smaller now. So, and on top of that, if you can imagine, if you're sitting at Costco in line or trying to decide whether to buy a beef cut you've never purchased before, but it's on sale and you want to try it, you could scan it right at the store. And then you would have choices. You could look at a simple preparation method, a full recipe with a shopping list while you're right there. Videos, you know, those tasty style, we call them hands and pans, where it's a 1-minute video on, you know, boom, how to do this. Also, you want nutritional information by cut, we'll offer that to you. You want to, I mentioned the videos, also branding information, or information about sustainability. Any variety of things can be there. So we're actually in the process of building that, and our plan is to launch before this quarter is finished. So we've promised committee we will have this thing up and running. It's not been done before to this level, where every beef cut is going to have its own home with a set of furniture in that home, and then we can just build on that as we get farther down the road. So I think, you know, and this is 100% from COVID, because nobody was using them before. Now everybody's using QR codes. And as you mentioned, the one sector we're the weakest in, the millennials and the younger people, they live on those phones and they have no problem at all scanning that little QR code. So our challenge is getting the QR code in front of them. So we envision, you know, first to be on the package, second to be part of the retail meat case, third to be offered in their print flyers or in their digital flyers. So when people are making a decision on what to buy, what's on sale. And then there's on the packaging material, there's so many applications for this. It's definitely going to be the way to go. We'll be the first out, and we expect that other commodities will probably soon follow. We're even going to customize the view in that, let's say a Loblaws wants, you know, they have 5 or 6 banners, major banners in tier 1. and maybe they want an opening skin that says that banner. You know, they want to look at Zayers or Superstore. We're going to offer that so that when that customer in Superstore scans that QR code, it's going to come up and say Superstore. All of the information will be, choices will come from us, but the consumer will believe it's coming from the retailer, and that's how you buy into partnerships. We're going to invest in getting this adapted because retailers tend to find reasons why things won't work. We're going to reduce those. We'll cover the cost. If it costs so much to get it loaded onto your system, we'll pay that fee. It's that important to us to get that information at the point of purchase as soon as possible. So
I'm hearing lots of enthusiasm for this along the sides, and there's a couple of questions that we didn't get to, but we are tipping into the next speaker's time. And thank you so much, panel, for your willingness and your enthusiasm. It's what makes a good conversation. I think if you'd stick around, there might be a few people that might direct message you in the chat as we go along. And thanks, John and Tyler and Michael. And
thank you.
Yep.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
And we're gonna skip the break because you guys can probably have already been taking breaks as we go along. And you know, this is the time where we recognize our sponsors, and I'll mention those again as we wrap up. But what we have next is our closing keynote speaker, Mr. Mike Shellenberger, the author of Apocalypse Never. And to introduce him, we've got Bob Toner with the Saskatchewan Livestock Association. And I think they're going to queue up a little video for that.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Toner, and I'm the president of the Saskatchewan Livestock Association. And I would like to introduce to you this afternoon's keynote speaker, Michael Shellenberger. Michael is the Time Magazine Hero of the Environment, Green Book Award winner, and the founder and president of Environmental Progress. Michael is author of the best-selling new book, Apocalypse Never, which has received strong praise from scientists and scholars, including Harvard's Steven Pinker, MIT scientist Carrie Emanuel, and the former CEO and chief scientist of the Nature Conservancy. Michael has been called an environmental and climate guru, North America's leading public intellectual on clean energy, as well as the high priest of the environmental humanist movement for his writings and TED Talks, which have been viewed over 5 million times. He has advised policymakers around the world, including the United States, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Belgium. Michael has been a climate and environmental activist for over 30 years. He is a leading environmental journalist who has broken major stories on Amazon deforestation, the rising climate resilience, the growing eco-anxiety, the United States government's role in the fracking revolution, as well as climate change and the California fires. He is co-founder of the Breakthrough Institute, where he was president from 2003 to 2015, and served as an advisor to MIT's Future of Nuclear Energy Task Force. Michael resides in Berkeley, California, and has traveled worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Shellenberger.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me.
You're coming through loud and clear.
Great. And I can share my screen. Is that right?
You can, yeah. Let's see it.
All right. Does that
There you
work
are,
for everybody?
Good. You bet.
Good. And I'm going to speak for, you guys wanted me to speak for a full hour. Is that right? Just confirming. I think that's what they said.
Yeah, we got you for an hour. We'll see with questions.
With questions. All right. Well, let's get started. I'm going to do a big overview of the environment. This is based on research for Apocalypse Never, which is right there in the background. And I want to present what I think is a more complete view of what's going on with the natural environment than the one that we have received really over the last 30 to 50 years. So let me start with some of the bad news. World's getting warmer, climate change is real. It's mostly, or if not entirely, caused by humans. We see very bad forest fires in California and in Australia. We saw a lot of concern about the Amazon in 2019, talking about our lungs of the world being on fire and our oxygen supply. A number of very big celebrities, Madonna, Cristiano Ronaldo, Leonardo DiCaprio, tweeted out this photo of the Amazon on fire and the threats to indigenous groups that live in the Amazon. We see concern about sea level rise from climate change, starving polar bears, the decline of wild animal populations by about half since 1970. And the biggest ones, of course, occurring in the tropics in the Southern Hemisphere. And that's mostly driven by habitat loss, biodiversity, habitat loss, and also just the eating of wild animals, the exploitation of wild animals. We're using about 1/4 of the Earth's surface for meat production. As all of you know, it takes a lot of pasture for cattle. And we've converted an area almost the size of Alaska into pasture since 1960. And that's been a big challenge for conservation efforts. We're also eating too many fish. About 1/3 of our fish stocks are overfished. 60% are just couldn't go anymore without overfishing them. And that's because we've been tripling the amount of fish that we eat since 1975. And we can see that we're expected to double the amount of fish that we consume again within a couple of decades. And so all of these pressures, it's a finite planet. We protect only about 15% of the Earth's surface. We only protect about 8% of the oceans. We've all seen the challenges of plastic waste and the impact on sea life of too much plastics in the ocean. Many people have seen this famous video of a marine biologist pulling a plastic straw out of the nose of an endangered sea turtle in Costa Rica. Went viral a few years back. And indeed, that species is critically endangered and declining. We now know, because of the coronavirus, assuming that coronavirus was not made in the Chinese lab, assuming that the conventional story is accurate, but even if it's not actually, even if it were made in a lab, coronaviruses are viruses that exist in bats, and they are zoonotic viruses. They spill over to humans, often in open air markets like this one in China or South Vietnam. And that's an environmental problem, because what we know is that even if it didn't occur at the market, it might have occurred on a farm somewhere under less than sanitary conditions. We know that interface between the wild natural areas and domestic meat production areas are places that need to be much better policed and monitored. And we also see great concern about climate change. 1 out of 5 British children said they're having nightmares about climate change. And the solutions most people have been led to believe are renewables, solar panels, and wind turbines. Wood fuel, people say, is better than fossil fuels. Energy efficiency, better light bulbs, these things will significantly reduce energy consumption, is the argument. And going vegetarian is proposed as a major way to reduce carbon emissions. The consensus among most people that care about climate change is that nuclear energy is not an important source of energy. It's not important to dealing with climate change. We don't need it. We have renewables, and nuclear is just too dangerous. Well, that's not the end of the story, as it turns out. In fact, that's a very partial view. So let's unpack it a little bit. Plastic straws, not a significant amount of plastic waste, just 0.03% of all the plastic waste in the oceans. The big problem with plastic waste is not having landfills or incinerators to manage it. It's just a waste management problem. And that's a problem of poverty and underdevelopment. So if we want to significantly eliminate the amount of plastic waste in the ocean, we should help poor countries to get waste management systems. Going vegetarian, many studies have been done. the best available science shows that going vegetarian reduces your carbon emissions between 2 and 4%. And part of the reason is that the money that people save by not eating meat, they spend on other things that require energy and produce carbon emissions, which is known as the rebound effect. Same thing happens actually when you do energy efficiency. That photo of the Amazon on fire was from 1999. It was not from 2019. And in fact, the fires that were occurring in 2019 were unlike this fire, which is a fire in the actual tropical rainforest. The big fires were actually occurring in what is known as the Savannah or Cerrado region, south of the Amazon rainforest itself. Fires overall globally have actually declined 25% since 2003, in large measure because of more efficient ways of clearing grasslands and forests for cattle. Instead of burning, when there's more resources, people can use tractors and fossil fuels and other ways to clear all that woody debris. In fact, the number of Amazon fires in 2019 was only 7% higher than the average of the prior 10 years. Deforestation had actually been on serious decline. It did not go up to previous levels and did not again in 2019 or 2020. We've lost about half the Amazon forest, which is a tragedy. It truly is a special place we should protect. But that means that we still can save almost all of it. In fact, half of it is already protected. The Yanomamis are one of the most wealthy indigenous groups in the world. They have an area of land under their control that is huge. It's massive. It's actually about the size of Hungary, but it's only 19,000 Yanomami, 10 million Hungarians. So it's in terms of, yes, there's definitely indigenous people still being hurt, but we should recognize that there's also been some incredible protections and concessions offered to indigenous tribes. It's terrible, the plastic waste and in the ocean, particularly when it kills sea life, but it's also the case that the major causes of albatross mortality, which is what this bird is, are from fishing boats and invasive predators, not plastic waste. And so we should be concerned about plastic waste, but if we're really looking for ways to reduce the killing of these birds, there's probably going to be lower hanging fruit elsewhere. In fact, reducing illegal fish bycatch is something that has worked really well in recent decades. Of the estimates in terms of what amount of plant, animal, and insect species have gone extinct, it's about 0.8%. There is a natural background rate of extinction. It's not like species just come into existence and then stay. There is speciation and extinction as natural processes before there were ever humans. So is that the sixth great extinction? Not really. In fact, we know that 3/4 of all species are not threatened according to the best available science, that the area of habitat that has to be lost for a species to go extinction is much larger than scientists had originally estimated. This is great news because it means that that species are able to survive on much less land than we thought. And in terms of the polar bears, there is no trend. We just don't know how many polar bears there are. I know there's people that go too far and they say that the polar bear numbers are going up. That's also not true. We just don't know. Here's what we know. You can see most of the polar bears we haven't counted. So, and that particular polar bear, well, this is another important fact. We killed twice as many polar bears as exists. So if you're really concerned about wild polar bears, we should just stop hunting them. That particular polar bear that was starving to death, we don't know why that polar bear was starving to death, and neither did the photographers. National Geographic issued a correction and they apologized for manipulating people's feelings because we love polar bears. Everybody wants to save polar bears, but it was wrong to suggest it was caused by climate change. Could be old age, it could be cancer, whatever, we don't know. Many species are doing much better. Humpback whales are coming back after a close brush with extinction. You can see we're killing 97% less. We just don't kill whales anymore. at that level. Sea turtles are also coming back. And the reason, one of the main reasons is because we've invented substitutes for the shells of hawksbill turtles. So this is, my glasses are tortoise shell, fake plastic tortoise shell. But they used to make what they call tortoise shell out of sea turtle shell. And that hunted them to extinction. So plastics provided a substitute for these bioplastics made from endangered species, and that helped to save them. So this may all sound like, who is this guy? So just to establish my environmental cred, nonprofit, we are completely independent. We have a small group of donors. We do our own research. We write up our findings in Forbes. Please check out my book, Apocalypse Never. All of this is in there. 30 years of research onto these issues, and you can also find a lot of it at our website, and some good publicity for the book. And my own interest has always been around both how do you improve people's lives and protect the natural environment at the same time. And I traveled to Nicaragua when I was 17 because I was a young radical, very concerned about this issue. I lived in Brazil, trying to understand what it's like to be in the Amazon. And there's something very romantic about it. There's something very simple and beautiful about it, but it's also a very hard life. I saw people don't have running water, don't have running drinking water. It's not just that it's hard labor, it's also that it takes a lot of time in your day. So if you want to go to school, if you want to get an education, it's very hard to do if you have to schlep water or wood all day long when you're living in poverty. So the good news, though, is that poverty has been going down. We see the amount of people living in extreme poverty fell from almost half of all humans. This is really amazing, 40 years ago, to just 1 out of 10. A big decline in child and infant mortality, and a big increase in life expectancy from around 30 years of age 150 years ago to over 70 years of age, over 80 in rich countries. We were worried about overpopulation, but the fertility rate has been declining so much. Couples choose to have fewer kids when they move to the city and they work in factories and office buildings rather than on the farm. We don't need a lot of kids. We have retirement savings instead of kids to take care of us in our old age. And all of this has taken a lot of pressure off the planet because there's a lot of people, and we eat a lot and we use a lot of energy, and these things take a lot of the natural environment. So these are very positive trends. We produce astonishing quantities of food. There is no scenario for climate change to reverse this growing surplus of food. I think most of us know, I experienced it. I eat too much food, right? And you see, though, that there's a relationship between energy and development, energy and GDP. There's some people that have argued, well, but if you get a lot of energy efficiency, then you don't need to use much energy. But that's not what the data show. The data show that energy consumption remains very tightly coupled to GDP. So you can see Germany there, a little squiggle going down just a little bit. It might go down a bit more, but it's not going to go down to India levels, not even to Malaysia levels. It's going to stay pretty high. What about climate change and natural disasters? We've reduced natural disaster deaths 90-some% over the last 100 years. There were under 500 deaths from natural disasters in the United States last year. I'm sorry, in 2019. We don't have 2020 data yet. That's hardly anybody. I mean, 500 people dying of natural disasters in the United States. I mean, that's like a rounding error, right? Over 50,000 deaths a year from car accidents. 75,000 deaths from drug overdoses in the United States. Used to be, just 20 years ago, it was 19,000 deaths, 17,000 deaths. There's no scenario in any of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports of this trend reversing itself, even with pretty high levels of warming. So this is great because that's not something that we need to worry about. We're not getting more hurricane damage to the extent to which there is more damage from natural disasters. It's because there's more wealth in harm's way. There's been more economic growth and prosperity. So the reason that when a hurricane hits Miami Beach causes so much more damage is because there's much more property to be damaged on Miami Beach than there was. So And again, I'm using all Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change science here. Even if their estimates prove to be significant underestimates, sea level rise is happening so slowly, about 1 centimeter a year. There's reason to think we can adapt to that. A lot of reasons to think. One of them is that the Netherlands adapted to living 7 meters below sea level. The median estimate for sea level rise is 0.6 meters, which is about 2 feet over between now and 2100. All else being equal, we would rather not have any sea level rise. You just don't really want environmental change because we've built our whole society around a particular temperature and climate, but not all else is equal, and that climate change is coming from economic development, and that's mostly been positive for humans and mostly positive for the natural environment, as we'll see. But sea level rise isn't something that worries me. People ask about tail risk, black swan, unexpected, unpredictable events. It's very hard to quantify, but you can see there have been efforts. One of the big analysts on all these issues, and someone that is admired a lot by Bill Gates, did a book on potential catastrophes. And he looked at probability and fatalities, and he ranked megawars, flus, volcanoes, tsunamis, and asteroids above climate change in terms of potential disasters. I mean, we've all just we're living through a terrible pandemic. It's not a flu exactly, but it's basically the same thing. There isn't a good scenario for anything occurring that would cause the amount of disruption that the coronavirus has created in societies from climate change. In terms of those fires in California, they're almost entirely due to the buildup of wood fuel in forests. So climate dries the wood fuels out, extends the fire season from 4 to 6 months, but it's not the cause of the intensity of the fires. The cause of that is fire suppression and the existing debt of wood fuel. What happened is, all of you probably know, Europeans came and they would go into the forest and the forest would catch fire, which is good because it burns off the woody debris, and they would start putting it out, and then they would harvest the wood. But the result was, when we stopped logging the forests in the 80s and 90s, we didn't maintain those forests properly, not most of them. Now, the ones that we did, we saw a big impact in terms of fires. So when you do good prescribed fires, like these prescribed burns, you burn up that woody debris and you prevent the big fires from burning. So we saw in 2020, these fires burning really hot and high, and then it got to this particular forest, which is managed by one of our utilities, interestingly enough, and the fire dropped to the ground and became a low intensity fire because they had managed the forest so well. So what I think the best way to think of it is, climate change is maybe contributing to fires, but it is neither a sufficient nor necessary cause of the fires, whereas the accumulation of wood fuel from the lack of prescribed burns and poor forest management is both sufficient and necessary to those high intensity fires. Good. So if you have other questions about that, we can go into that a little later. The other good thing that's happening is that forests are coming back, particularly in developed countries like Europe. You see in Europe, an area covered by forests increased, an area almost the size of Portugal. That's because we are producing more food on less land, including more beef on less land, which is maybe the most important thing when it comes to the environment. It's very, very important to produce more meat on less land, given the amount of land required for meat. So I was happy to be here today and be able to talk about that issue, because I think it's so important to protecting endangered species. You can see now more of 40% of Europe is now tree covered. Over the last 100 years, it allowed Spain and France to reforest. Just look at how much more green they are now. Not as green as we would like, those of us here in California, but much greener than they were when they were using so much more of it for farming. Plastic waste, it's a development problem. We need to have more economic development for poor countries so they can manage their waste. We should also stop sending them our plastic waste. It turns out that in our desire to recycle plastic waste, we're shipping it to poor countries who don't have recycling capabilities, and then much of it's making it into the ocean, which might be one of the greatest of very many unintended consequences of bad environmental policy of all times. I don't think most people know that they should throw your plastic in the trash, or or it should be incinerated, but it really shouldn't be recycled because it doesn't make any sense and it often ends up in the ocean. You can see, I mentioned this before, that we had expanded the amount of land required for meat production about the size of Alaska. We've now reduced it by about 80% the size of Alaska since the year 2000. So this is the total amount of land that humankind uses to produce meat. Great story for meat producers. You guys are producing so much more on less land. And I know we all show everyone shows the photos of all the grassy pastures, but what has been important has been that intensification. We've seen a lot of greening globally, and it's absorbing carbon emissions quite significantly. Aquaculture is doing pretty well. You can see we are now eating more farmed fish. When you go to restaurants and you get fish, if you can get farmed fish, I highly recommend it. There's a good farmed salmon now, a very good farmed salmon that is genetically modified, produced on land. It's a great salmon. There's superstitious fears about it, but it is the key to being able to leave more fish in the ocean. And we've actually done a pretty good job saving land. You know, we've protected an area about the size of Africa for land conservation. So we should give credit to conservationists. 120, 150 years of land conservation going on for natural environments. 25 times more protected areas than in 1962. The biodiversity of our islands has doubled. Some of that's bad, but it's not a problem of extinctions per se. So what matters? What does it all mean? If we care about the natural environment, if we care about improving the lives of people, what should we care about? So let's try to understand the mechanism a little bit more about how humans save nature, since we've spent so much time last several decades on how humans destroy the natural environment. How do we save nature? So the first thing we do is that we stop using it. So we used to hunt whales for their oil, which we burned in lamps. We created a really good substitute, kerosene from petroleum. You can see that it happened very quickly. The amount of whale oil peaked in the mid-50s, and really within a few years, it replaced almost all of the whale oil that we were using for our lighting. And people at the time knew that this is what was going on. Vanity Fair ran an editorial cartoon, grand ball given by the whales in honor of the discovery of the oil wells in Pennsylvania. So they knew right away that the whales would be spared by this incredible case of substitution. And so we use artificial substitutes to replace the natural products, and then we save the natural products. The Drake well, the single Drake well in Pennsylvania, produces as much oil in one day as it would take whaling voyages to obtain over 3 to 4 years. So abundant energy has been essential. Same thing with fuel wood. We now know, with these really detailed physical calculations of heat energy, that wood fuel could not have led to the Industrial Revolution. It didn't matter how much wood they could get from, everything was there, they couldn't get enough heat to power these factories in this really concentrated way. You have all these people in a single factory, they needed coal, and the consequence of that substitution and also growing more food on less land was that we could reduce how much wood we used for fuel, and that ended up being very positive. Coal obviously proved to be very dirty at the beginning, but we also have cleaned up coal enormously. You can see here as a result of burning coal and the transition to natural gas, cleaner vehicles, we reduced our air pollutants between 60 and 99%. Incredible success. The amount of land we use for agriculture increased modestly since early 60s, but the amount of food we increased was much more. 8% increase in land use, but 300% increase in food production. The amount of land we used for producing beef and cow's milk increased even as the amount of land that we used shrank. Part of this is the breeders, amazing what they've been able to do, what they did with chickens, cutting the feeding time by half while more than doubling their weight. Well, this is, you guys all understand the same picture. Same thing with emissions. 50% more meat production, reduction in emissions from livestock by 10%. It's a story I have not heard beef producers talk about. Incredible successes of innovation and productivity. Paper bags, mostly plastic bags, are good for the environment. They're just much lighter. One of the things is you want to use lighter materials rather than heavier materials in general. So moving from paper to plastic has actually been good for the environment, contrary to what most people think. But the great case of what we call dematerialization is the iPhone or the smartphones. Just think about all the stuff we used to have, the speakers and the stereo systems. It was like a nightmare. Fax machines, DVD players, cameras, telephones. I love this chart. And it all gone in a single iPhone. And so the way to think about this is you want to use energy to dematerialize. You want to use energy to use less natural resource. Materials, matter, is just natural resource or nature. Energy is almost entirely dematerialized, right? Electricity is just electrons. You know, even when you move from wood to coal to natural gas and oil, you're moving from the surface of the earth underneath the earth. So you're actually, you're using materials that are below ground, and you're doing it in ways that reduce the use of materials above ground. So it's a pretty simple process, though. I think it's fair to say most people go through college and get their degrees in environmental studies without ever learning some of this basic relationship between energy and matter. Cities concentrate people. They cover just 0.5% of the ice-free surface of the earth, and yet half of us live in them. As we go from various modes of production, hunter-gatherer, agriculture, industrial, post-industrial, we do have higher population densities. So it is sad when people leave the farm. My mom was sad when her family lost the family farm. On the other hand, very few of us want to go back and work on the farm. And our farmers are so productive now. It's just such a success story that allows us to have all sorts of crazy jobs that nobody could have. My grandfather, who worked on the farm, could never have imagined. So the big event is still, how do we reduce the amount of land we use for food and energy so we can have more habitat for endangered species like this yellow-eyed penguin we saw in New Zealand, which is such a sensitive little bird. It needs a lot of space, and they're in trouble because we're eating too much of their fish, and the New Zealanders are using too much of their habitat, mostly for meat production. So this is where the rubber hits the road. We got to see if we can concentrate more of that meat production. When we went to New Zealand, I could see most people would look at this and they would think, well, that's wonderful. It's a beautiful environment, and it is so beautiful. On the other hand, there is not very many sheep per hectare in New Zealand. We'd like to see that amount of land used for that. We'd like to see that concentrated more, so we could have a little bit more of that area for yellow-eyed penguins. If you want to save yellow-eyed penguins, if you don't care, then I guess it's fine. But if you care about trying to save endangered species, you want to squeeze more of those sheep on less land. We know that agricultural modernization reduces the amount of land. When you just go from farm animals to tractors and farm machinery, it reduced, this is just in the United States, by the way, it reduced the amount of land we need to produce the animal feed. It reduced it by an area the size of California. In other words, we use an area of California's worth less land because we switched from farm animals to tractors. Well, that's going to happen everywhere in the world over the next, hopefully, a few decades, which opens a lot of possibilities of saving endangered species. Sub-Saharan African farmers can increase the yields by 100%. Actually, there's studies that show much more than that, in fact, but nonetheless, just 100% just by having the irrigation, fertilizer, and farm machinery. Nothing magic, no genetically modified organisms, just plain Jane farming. When it hits sub-Saharan Africa, they're gonna be able to produce much more food, much less land. If we went to the levels of our most successful farmers, global food yields would rise 70%. We don't even need that much food. So there's a lot of possibility for a really good environmental future with agricultural modernization. Our use of wood appears to have peaked. It could soon start to decline. This is great news. We're going to leave the wood in the forest. We're going to look back at the period of print newspapers as a period of barbarism, a lack of civilization. It's wild when you think of how much paper we used for newspapers. Totally unnecessary now. We don't need to use wood. And the amount of land that we use for agriculture might be at its peak. Now we see it going down from meat, that's huge, but it could be at a global peak. That's a gigantic moment in human development. People worry about runoff from agriculture, from fertilizer. It is a problem. They have had problems in places that are very serious agricultural powerhouses like the Netherlands. Just a lot of nitrogen in the environment. But the Netherlands also was able to double yields while using the same amount of fertilizer. We just get better at it. This is called precision agriculture. I don't need to tell you guys. Precision agriculture opens up all sorts of possibilities for environmental protection. What about the soils? That's why poor countries need fertilizers. That's why they need advanced technology so that they're not depleting their soils. They can replenish their soils with fertilizer and no-till agriculture. We've seen this here, we've significantly reduced soil erosion in the United States just over a 40-year period while increasing yields. So that's the good news. Now, the bad news is much of what environmentalists say they want to do is not a really good idea. So let's take a closer look. Most people want to eat meat. I was vegetarian for 10 years. And I just didn't have enough energy. So I think, what we find is that very few people stick with it. One of the most interesting things I discovered is that in the research for the book, I have a chapter on meat. Vegetarianism is really an ideology more than it is a practice. And by that, I mean, the research shows that 90% of vegetarians eat fish, 2/3 eat chicken or poultry, and 1/3 eat red meat. I always joke, vegetarians, most vegetarians eat meat. So it's not, if we cannot save the planet by making everybody go vegetarian. That's pretty darn clear. 80% of those who try a vegetarian diet abandon it in the first year or so. It is also interesting, the people that appears as though there is a kind of particular way of thinking about the world, if I say it generously, almost a kind of anxiety though about the world that exists psychologically and then manifests itself into two sister ideologies. One is environmental, apocalyptic environmentalism, let's say, and then the other is vegetarianism. And sometimes you think they're the same, but they're not quite. But they both come from a kind of anxiety, a kind of fear of death, actually, is one of the things they found, is that, and you hear vegetarians talk about it, they don't want to eat death. It's this fear of death. So something's going on, and it's not just a kind of rational thing. It's a really ideological thing, which is very interesting. I'm not sure we totally understand it yet. In terms of plastic waste, we know what we need to do. We need to have good landfills. Our landfills are so much better than they were 30 years ago. We seal them really well now, and we also vent the gases really well, and we capture the gases and we burn the gases, most of which are natural gases. They can be burned. They should be burned, because when they're not burned, they can be potent greenhouse gases, and then we can use them to make electricity. So our landfills are great. If you don't have enough space for landfills, or it's too inefficient, like in Japan or Netherlands, then they incinerate, and the incineration has become so good. It used to release dioxin which is a pretty toxic chemical, and now they burn so hot that they break up the dioxin molecules. So the dioxin is not a concern anymore. They have big incinerators right there in downtown Tokyo, and Tokyo and the residents of Japan are very concerned about bodily purity. So it's a very good technology. We know that pasture beef just requires a lot more land than industrial beef. Hope I'm not offending anybody, but generally from an environmental perspective, I think the evidence is clear. You want to have concentrated beef rather than a lot of pasture beef. It also produces a lot less carbon emissions. And part of it is because grass-fed cows just gain weight more slowly. So you can see here some of the difference in modes of food production in terms of how much time these things take. It's a bit of an academic point, but you know, the solutions that have been offered to Africa to date have really been inadequate. Africa and other poor countries, they've tried these wood substitutes for wood fuel. Terrible idea. They haven't worked anywhere. Tourism is just, it's great to go to these, I mean, if you love wildlife, go to Africa, go see the gorillas, but it's not a way for poor countries to develop. They just don't make enough money on it. Regulations, people are always like, you know, everyone's asking about the Biden regulations. It's just not the main event. You know, they tried all these regulations of whale killing in the 20th century. Until you have substitutes, which by the way, I forgot to mention, in the 20th century, the substitute for whale oil was vegetable oil, in particular palm oil, which now has all sorts of terrible environmental consequences. But it was Europeans that were using the whale oil in the early 20th century to make margarine and soap, fun fact. And it was the creation of these really cheap vegetable oils that replaced them. But the regulations, it's very hard for policymakers to impose regulations if you don't have a good alternative. So the main event is technological innovation and the development of alternatives. As now, it was back then, countries that didn't make any money on whaling and didn't depend on whaling were the ones who would go out there and thunder the loudest about how terrible whaling was. So one of the reasons I wrote this book is because on a bunch of things that matter to the environment, my friends in the environmental movement oppose good technologies. They oppose things that we need. So I didn't want to this is not a book I wrote just because I wanted to write a textbook on the environment, though there is a textbook on the environment in the book, hidden. Snuck it in there so people would read the content, but really there's a really important issue here, which is that some people are ideologically opposed to good technologies. Here's this incredible salmon production facility. It uses genetically modified salmon. They grow twice as fast. They require less feed, all on land, which you want because you don't want contamination. You don't want that wastewater going into the natural environment. All on land in these facilities, beautiful salmon, very high quality, equal, better, superior to natural salmon, totally opposed by every major environmental group, opposed by Whole Foods. Whole Foods doesn't carry it. Trader Joe's won't carry it. It's just, it's appalling. And really, the holy grail, of course, is to get to tuna. We're not there yet, but if you can get to the artificially made tuna, that's going to be very significant. We need to support these technologies. This is the science on it. It's called Aqua Advantage. I do not take any funding from this group. I think it's a great technology, but I wish them the best. But I genuinely kind of go, this is important. We should pay attention to it. Natural gas, is that good or bad? My view is that natural gas is good when it replaces coal. Look at it. I mean, how could you? I mean, natural gas. Everybody knows natural gas is better than coal. We burn it in our kitchens. It's reduced the amount of mountaintop mining. They're moving whole mountain tops from mountains in places like West Virginia and Kentucky So clearly better than coal. You can see this is what it looks like when you coal mine. It's just, whereas natural gas, just a little fracking well on the top of the surface of the earth, it's obviously better. You don't need to have any scientific studies to show that, though it helps. We've seen a significant reduction in the amount of natural gas leakage. The leakage is of the product. So the business owners have an interest in reducing leakage. It'd be good to have some regulation there, but for the most part, it does happen on its own, like energy efficiency. These technologies are often game changing. I mean, look at the difference in the carbon footprint between the 3 different kinds of salmon. Look at the differences when gas is replacing coal. Most energy transitions are really slow. They take place over like 50 or 100 years or longer, hundreds of years. Coal replaced wood over hundreds of years. This transition from coal to natural gas in the United States is super fast. You can see just in a few years. And it's because of fracking. It's because we just are able to produce so much gas at such a small price. And so the consequence, and this is the right metric to look at, the carbon intensity of energy has declined for 150 years. This is the right metric to look at if you're concerned about climate change. This will, as this goes, so we go from wood to coal to oil to natural gas to uranium for nuclear. That's moving from more carbon intensive, more resource intensive fuels towards more hydrogen intensive or less carbon intensive fuels. In the book, I have these 3 characters: Bernadette from the Congo, Suparti from Indonesia, and Helen, my wife, from the United States. And you can see my wife used a lot of energy. Just kidding. That's average American energy consumption. And it's not, you can see Bernadette, who uses wood as her primary source of energy, and Bernadette, who uses mostly fossil fuels now, but just a lot less than Helen. Our wealth is a reflection of energy. We need to understand that. And that Bernadette and Suparti need to use a lot more energy. Helen's fine, but Bernadette and Suparti need to get their energy levels up. And it's also the quality of the energy. Look how much more of Bernadette's per capita energy consumption comes from burning wood and biomass. So she's breathing the smoke, and it's toxic wood smoke. It's carcinogenic. Suparti, she's still getting a quarter, it looks like that, of her, it's Indonesian average. She's still getting a quarter from biomass, and we get almost none. We should have none. And so for women in particular, it's moving from having to tend and cook a fire to being able to just very quickly cook, right? I mean, even when you think about like how, I mean, now we microwave, right? So you can eating is a small part of your day. You can spend more of your day doing other things. You can get an education. You can have a job. You can pursue your individual creativity. Energy transitions are how women are liberated in the real world. And I want to underscore that. The talk of renewables, it's just a lot of propaganda for the most part. These claims that get made, 25% reduction in Vermont. In fact, we saw a 16% increase. Why is that? Mostly because they shut down their nuclear plant. Bill told me, I've known Bill for 20 years. He told me he didn't think shutting down the nuclear plant led to an increase in emissions. He's wrong, it did. We document that in the book. But if you just look at how countries get their electricity, there's something that all these places and states, countries and states, is that France and Sweden and Switzerland, these are very nuclear heavy countries. Illinois is a very nuclear heavy state in comparison to California, for example. We hear a lot more about California for climate change than Illinois, but Illinois actually does much better than we do. We've put a bunch of money into solar and wind, about 2.3 trillion, about 2 trillion for nuclear, but we get almost twice as much electricity from nuclear as solar and wind. Everybody knows we need nuclear. Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says so. Really, all you need to know is France and Germany. You know, France gets more than twice as much of its electricity from zero emission sources. German power prices went up 50% over the last decade. Germany spends almost twice as much on its electricity as France, and France produces 1/10 of the carbon emissions per unit of electricity as Germany. It's just it's just a straight overtime comparison. Two big countries. One is very big on nuclear. France is 75% nuclear. One is very anti-nuclear. Germany is phasing out its nuclear and phasing up renewables. And you just see for yourself, it's a game changer. The problem with solar and wind is they produce too much energy when you don't need it, and not enough energy when you do. People like to talk about how we're going to have solar panels on electric cars, but when we charge our electric cars, we tend to charge them at night because people use their cars still, particularly in the United States, for going to work and coming back from work. And that means that they're charging their cars when there's no sunshine. So we're not going to be able to use a lot of solar to charge our cars. And people say we can charge them at work. Maybe. We don't have that system in place. And what we end up doing then is California ends up paying other states to take our excess solar electricity when we produce too much of it. And then we had cascading electrical failures last summer because we thought we were going to be able to get a lot of wind, but it was too hot. Like, it was hot because there wasn't wind. So these are not working. We have huge batteries in California. It's in a place called Escondido, but it would require 15,000 of them at a cost of 764 billion, and it would just give us 4 hours of backup power. Well, you need several weeks of backup power if you're going to rely on solar and wind, because you have to go months of periods of time. Like right now, it's been cloudy for several days. We just can't store that amount of electricity. It's too much. The process of going to renewables in California was expensive. Our electricity prices rose 7 times more than in the rest of the United States over the last decade, almost entirely due to renewables. Had Germany spent the 580 billion it's going to spend on renewables, if it had spent it on nuclear instead, it would be getting 100% of its energy for electricity and transportation from zero emission sources. People say, well, Michael, what about the waste from the nuclear plants? And I'm like, as an environmentalist, this is what I want my waste to look like. I want all of the waste in a single basketball court from a half a century. It's just nothing. From a waste perspective, this is what you want. You don't want your waste in the oceans or spread all over landscapes. You want them contained so you have more natural environment. The real concern, of course, is people think it'll somehow explode. It can't explode. It can't hurt anybody. The real issue is fear of nuclear weapons. Dates back from the 60s and the 50s. These fears were grossly exaggerated. Yes, nuclear weapons are dangerous. Weapons are dangerous. But we've seen all of the most dangerous encounters occurred a few years after the invention of the bombs. Never used them after World War II. And in fact, most political scientists agree they've had a stabilizing impact. So some of this is just an echo, a hangover from the 1960s. All right, what else is going on? And after this, I'll wrap up. I think we have a little time for questions. There's a naturalistic fallacy going on. People think that what's natural is better. They also think that some things are more natural than others. People think solar panels are more natural than nuclear plants. It's not true, but this appeal to nature fallacy. People think that having a lot of cows spread over pasture is better. It's better to intensify, concentrate them. Solar is energy dilute, and so we end up producing 300 times more waste from solar panels than nuclear. We see a lot of the bad stuff that's occurred in the Amazon, like this kind of fragmentation is due to a kind of ideology that says every landowner should set aside 20 to 50% of her land for conservation, but that ends up in fragmentation. I think most people have a sense that renewables are energy dilute, which is why in Blade Runner 2049, they open the movie and you go over this huge solar farm in this dystopian California future based on this solar farm, of which it would take 18 of these to produce the same amount of electricity as Diablo Canyon. It killed many of these desert tortoises. We now see protests against renewables happening around the world, including in Germany. Some of this is just romantic opposition to progress, anti-economic growth. This is a kind of Malthusian, anti-human development point of view. I'll skip some of this so we have some time for chit chat. And then people like to, and then fear is just a very powerful emotion. Fear is a very available emotion. It's protected us, it protects us. Fear is very good, but it's just easy to tap into, it's easy to abuse. Greta said, I don't want you to hope, I want you to panic. I don't wish for my worst enemies to panic. None of us should. Panic is very dangerous, actually, when you think about it, how many people get hurt by panic. So let me wrap up. This is a lot of nuclear. I've given 3 TED Talks on nuclear, so folks can check it out. There's obviously financial interest at stake. The media's got an interest in it. Macron even had a hidden motivation to attack Amazon deforestation. His farmers in France did not want to import Brazilian beef. That was part of why he was going after the Amazon. So let's wrap up with what matters. We should still seek to reduce emissions. We should seek better waste disposal. We should move from matter-dense fuels to energy-dense fuels. We should help poor countries to develop, intensify agriculture, work with poor countries to get these modern agricultural technologies, including meat production. Temple Grandin, you guys must know her. We can have it all, guys. We're going to be able to save these special environments because we love them, and also because we're rational and we embrace the technologies that are required to save them. Thank you guys for having me. I hope I didn't go over too long. I know we wanted some interaction, so I'll just stop right there, and thank you very much.
Well, it makes sense, Michael, that you'd put your book up there at the end, but that picture of Lake Louise was pretty good too. I mean, that's or Moraine Lake, I guess you'd call it, just above Lake Louise. That's a beautiful spot and used to grace one of our pieces of currency. Well, thanks. You skated through a lot there and had a lot to go into, and I think
and by the way, the
you
slides are all up on the
questions.
website. The slides are up on the website. So I went through, I thought I could do it all in an hour, but all the slides from the website, people have any questions, they go to the website and see them all.
Well, that's the bugger about being passionate about things. You want to talk about it a little bit
Exactly.
more, right? So, and that comes through. So I'll just check and monitor and go through some of the questions here along the sides and see what your thoughts. One is just I think a nuts and bolts piece. Like, how do you get rid of that nuclear waste? You showed that room, but that's a forever room, or we just haven't figured it out yet? Maybe.
It could be a forever room. I mean, it could be, some people want to bury it. I'm fine with the forever room. You know, there is a possibility to recycle that waste, but there's no need to. You know, you have to remember, there's a lot of forever stuff. Anything that is all the solar panels are forever waste too, but we don't worry about them in the same way we worry about nuclear. So, you know, much of our waste is forever waste. A lot of the waste that goes into the landfills is forever waste. There's just not that much of it. I mean, that's the thing, is that what are we worried about? There's a national security issue. If you're really worried about that, you can bury it far underground, but you're still going to want to monitor the site.
Yeah. Okay. Have you heard about regenerative agriculture? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with like a lot. I mean, I just think there's a lot of experimentation and great stuff that's going on. You know, in general, my view is you just want to grow more food on less land if you care about the natural environment. And that's the main event. So there's some conflicting science I've seen on regenerative and questions around carbon emissions.
I worry a bit more about the overall land use.
What about meat produced in a lab? Do you think how does that mesh with your talk of energy and the like? So
I'm sorry, can you ask one more time? Because
yeah, my sound is.
Can you hear me?
My sound went a little funny. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can. Yeah. So
Good.
I just did a little reset there. One of the questions was, do you have any thoughts on, you know, this meat produced in a lab meat analogs or whatever, how does that match with some of what you've seen around energy density, or
Yeah.
is that the beef equal of the fish you were talking about?
It is. It is exactly that. Absolutely. I'm very pro animal-free meat, lab meat, cultured meat. We're a very long ways off from it being any good, is my understanding. But before we get like a proper steak is a long ways off. But hamburger might be closer than people think. But yes, that is the direction, and it is also a move towards greater power densities and less material throughput. So you can use a lot less natural environment by having a lot of energy to produce the inputs for that meat.
Yeah. You said something that really tweaked me. You said right early on, you said, how do you improve people's lives and improve the natural environment at the same time? And to me, that sounds like most ranchers I know's life's work, and mission statements of a lot of people that I work for. So that just blew my mind that you were saying that. Longer question here about, the Brazilian rainforests are kind of a postcard of environmental protection, but I think we're a little sensitive to the grasslands of North America with, endangered species and both plant and animal, and a lot of carbon sequestered there. Why hasn't that ecosystem, which depends on grazers, keystone grazers like cattle or bison, been as much of a poster child, I guess? Do you have thoughts on that? Has that been part of your life, thinking about that greater plains and preserving the grasslands?
Yeah, absolutely. Grasslands are essential critical habitat. I think there's a really big important story to tell there. I'm from Colorado, from prairie country. In fact, from Greeley, which is a major meatpacking center, as you must know, your industry. But yeah, I think there's a great story there for sure, and some of that's been told by Nature Conservancy and others. But I definitely think, there's much more to say about it.
What else am I missing here? So if the globe warms, have you looked at, winners and losers? Are we, we're in some pretty cold country every January and February in middle Saskatchewan. Does it look better for us? Does it look worse for others as this unfolds? Or
oh yeah,
it's hard to bet on, I suppose.
No, I mean, I think most people agree, and the science has been fairly consistent on it for 30 years, which is that, yeah, the northern latitudes are going to be much warmer, are going to do much better, Canada's going to have a significant increase, I believe, in area of farmland and ranch land, and definitely worse impacts in poor countries. Though what I always point out, which are mostly in the tropics, but we always point out is that what really makes the difference for sub-Saharan Africans is being able to get modern agriculture, being able to get food, being able to get irrigation, fertilizer, tractors, mechanization. That's the main event. That's going to have a much bigger impact than any amount of climate change they get. And so there really don't need to be any losers. Really everybody should succeed, and there should be some collaboration, I think, globally on this issue, but there is no agreement on it. So climate has been stuck in this conversation about how do we keep poor countries in an older mode of production rather than helping to take them to the next level.
That's amazing. And I think, there's a whole lot of political conversations about why some of these things have not unfolded in better times. Shout out from the guy who works for JBS about Go Greeley. The question, is there a short answer to why, previous, cycles and warming cycles and cooling cycles of the world, how is this one for sure different?
Well, one of the things is it was looking to a lot of people like we were headed to an ice age through natural cycles. We may very well have been in an ice age through natural cycles. So it appears to be, that is a part of the reason why people tend to think that so much of the climate change, if not most of it, is due to humans. It's not to say there's not a there's no natural cycles. It's not to say that there's not a role for the natural environment, but there is just a lot of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere, and we are seeing it track pretty closely with temperatures, particularly if you're using ocean temperatures. So yeah, I hope that answers it.
Well, yeah, giving you all the simple ones, and question about how do you balance that, lower greenhouse gases versus biodiversity, which is going to win, and what should, even, you've got grasslands that are sequestering carbon, but it's also important to, you've twigged a lot of thoughts.
Mostly it's a benevolent pattern, and Canada's been decarbonizing, the United States has been decarbonizing, Canada's been moving from coal to natural gas and nuclear. Your agriculture and farming has also seen reductions in its greenhouse gas emissions per unit of meat and overall. So these trends have been very positive. I mean, my view is that there's a really powerful story to be told by cattle ranchers and the meat industry that hasn't been told yet, because there's been so much misinformation, so much of it driven by just a general vegetarianism. In the book, I talk about how there's a lot of what we call stealth advocacy of vegetarianism that dresses itself up as environmental and climate change concern. But when you really look at it, these are folks that are militant vegetarians, and they're using climate change as a way to advocate their anti-meat agenda.
Well, that's interesting you say that. I mean, there's been a theme through the last couple of days around needing to step up and tell the positive stories that we have, and it's neat that you put it in that context, that these are ideology-driven folks, because I think there's some financially driven folks that are driving the vegetarian message, because your processed foods, your meat-free protein is in the middle of the grocery store with maybe a better margin than some of your simple, slower foods that are around the outsides, including meat and dairy. And I wonder about, even, lab meat and the like. There's a financial imperative there to push down the naturally made and the cow-based beef. But it's neat to hear you talk about the ideology of it as well as. Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Michael, for joining us, from, all the experience you have. And I do have a copy here, so I gotta,
Hey.
You ruined it by saying there's a textbook hiding in there, but hopefully that means it's hiding amongst a pressing narrative that I'll rip through very easily.
I hope so.
Glad that we could get you to join us virtually,
Yeah,
and save you from sub-zero temperatures in Canada. Hopefully we'll see you down the road. Take
That
care.
sounds great. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. Well, that brings us to the closing remarks for the Saskatchewan Beef Industry Conference for 2021. Again, I'd like to, talk about our sponsors. The founders of SBIC, the Beef Industry Conference, include the Saskatchewan Government's Ministry of Agriculture, the University of Saskatchewan's College of Agriculture and Plant Sciences, Saskatchewan Cattle Feeders, Saskatchewan Stock Growers and Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association, and the Saskatchewan Livestock Association. That's a lot of saying Saskatchewan in a row. Our other sponsors for this event, the presenting sponsor was the Saskatchewan Government's Ministry of Agriculture. Our platinum sponsors, Farm Credit Canada, Saskatchewan Verified Beef Production Plus, the Saskatchewan Livestock Finance Cooperative, the University of Saskatchewan's Livestock and Forage Center of Excellence, and our gold sponsors are Pound Maker Ag Ventures Limited, Dudley and Company LLP as well, and our friends level sponsor was Scotiabank. And coming up, we've got, like I said, for part of the conference is annual meetings too. And we had the cattle feeders meeting a couple days ago. We'll have SCA's annual meeting on February 1st there at 1 o'clock this coming Monday. And then later in February, the 25th, the stock growers have their semi-annual meeting too. So we've went virtual, and we've also kind of dispersed some of these meetings rather than having them all in one hotel over a few days. Glad to have all your participation during this. Sure sucks to not see so many of you that we see, probably this once a year or a few other times. So hopefully we get this darn vaccine rolled out and we'll see you all soon. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.